are you going?
Going to Disneyland.
No, we're not. We're going to the Emmys.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
I'm a fan of classic movies.
Hello and welcome to Overlapping Dialogue, a podcast of audio commentaries dedicated to discussing cinema that fascinates us in a way we hope fascinates you. We're your co-hosts, Kyle and Levi Huffman. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Levi.
And here we are. We're here for our 19th episode. 19. The podcast is going through its awkward dorm room phase where we come to visit and you're like, oh, what's that poster on the wall? Well, who's those friends you're hanging out with? You know, that phase of the podcast.
Right.
So now for something completely different, though. From what we tackled last week, the Country Bears, which, you know, imagine yourself as a parent and you walk in and you see a Country Bears poster on your child's dorm room, boy or girl. What would your response be?
Commitment to some facility. Interestingly, this movie would be more in line with possibly being a college dorm room poster, but not still.
Not
I actually have a story, college-related story to do with this movie I'll talk about later. That's kind of random, but
we put the Country Bears to rest. R.I.P. Not really. And today we're going to be tackling another. Speaking of R.I.P. murder mystery. And as we're recording this, actually, it's kind of storming outside. It was a dark and stormy afternoon. Saturday afternoon. Clue from 1985.
Also known as Cluedo in certain areas.
Parts of the world. Now, of course, this is an adaptation of the famous board game, which I know we've had a lot of fun playing over the years.
We can talk about that game a little bit here in a little while.
But, Levi, why don't you run us through some of the key details associated with Clue?
Well, first of all, it's a 1985 American black comedy mystery film based on that board game Cluedo. It's called Clue around here. I think it was originally English or British, so maybe that's why it's called that. But it was directed by Jonathan Lynn, who collaborated on the script with John Landis, and all these.
Which I know Jonathan Lynn, we'll spend a second talking about him.
Yeah.
I know this was, I think, technically his film directorial debut. I know he was, I think, a former actor who became kind of a popular theater director in London.
Yeah.
Of all places.
He was English, I think.
He was English. And so this was kind of his first real directorial effort. Run through some of his other films, though, as well here.
Looks like Nuns on the Run, which I've never heard of.
Yeah, that is Eric Idle and Robbie Coltrane, I think, in it. I just looked this up recently.
My Cousin Vinny.
Which is very famous.
Yeah, and then The Whole Nine Yards.
Yeah, which is, of course, the Bruce Willis mob comedy.
Some other things.
Matthew Perry also.
Television series is Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. That's the English thing, I'm guessing. Let me look if there's some other stuff. Looks like he made a movie version of Sergeant Bilko.
That's with Steve Martin, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, from the 90s.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
So, I mean, he's made some pretty popular films, actually, all in all. I think especially My Cousin Vinny's really kind of
9 yards
broken through.
Yeah.
But you just said the producer on this, one of the producers was John Landis, who we already have a podcast in mind in the future that we're going to spend a lot more time talking about John Landis. But Landis was kind of one of the key figures behind this. He tells the story. There's a really terrific book, if you're at all interested in not only Landis, but this kind of particular moment in American cinema, called John Landis. It was kind of written and compiled by a female critic by the name of I'll try to say this. It's Italian, so please forgive me. Julia D'Angelo Vallon, or Vallon?
Diagnolo. Or Agnolo Vallon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she, I know, wrote a really terrific essay about Heaven's Gate, if you have the criterion for that.
Oh, she wrote that? Oh, okay.
Yeah, and she also wrote, apparently, I was telling you about this earlier today, a Robert Altman book, which is very fascinating. This book, of all things, I would say is actually one of the models of what a book about a filmmaker should be, in the sense that it kind of has essays about the films, but then also it kind of, most of the book is a long interview she conducted with Landis, but not only with Landis, but also from some of his key collaborators. So most of the book is an interview with Landis, but then you got other people, Joe Dante, Jonathan Lynn, I'll mention this here in a second, has a extended thing about him, David Cronenberg, B.B. King, just a lot of people, Jamie Lee Curtis, a lot of people that were, Wes Craven, Dan Aykroyd, people who have, Forrest J. Ackerman, I'm going to finally finish the sentence here now, a lot of people who were involved with Landis at some point. And again, we're going to spend more time talking about Landis in the future, we think, because he's someone I'm very much fascinated by. I wrote a paper on in college. But the reason to talk about Landis here, I think, is because it really, in its own way, though he was not the director of this movie, he was one of the kind of key brain trusts behind how it became what it was, and I think it's very indicative of a lot of things about him, in particular this era of American film comedy. There's a really terrific chapter in here that it's only about like 4 pages of Jonathan Lynn actually walking through meeting Landis and him being pitched on this idea of a Clue movie. And I'm going to read this actually verbatim from this. This is Lynn talking about Landis pitching him this movie of Clue. John's pitch was like nothing I've ever seen before or since. He acted out his vision of the movie, up on his feet, shouting, gasping, whispering, running, screaming when a body was discovered, careening around the office to demonstrate how the characters would rush around the house, jumping up on his desk, a whirlwind of high-octane activity. I was mesmerized, fascinated, and drawn right in to the bizarre, mysterious tale that he was weaving. Finally, after about 15 minutes, he stopped and shouted, and then the butler says, "I'll tell you who done it." And the butler tells us. He paused dramatically. I waited, eager to know the explanation, the trick, the solution. It would obviously have to be remarkably ingenious, but he said nothing. "So who was it?" I asked impatiently. "What really happened?" "I don't know," he said. "That's why I need a writer." And again, we'll delve into this, I think, in the future. This particular moment in Landis' career was right after the disaster of the Twilight Zone production, which, of course, unfortunately, Vic Morrow and some others were killed in that helicopter accident. But this was really when Landis was kind of at the apex of his career, really, in terms of having the most clout and the most juice, so to speak. And he even contemplated directing this movie, but he instead handed it out to Jonathan Lynn. I'll pose this to you, Levi, then I'll kind of maybe finish this off. What about this movie is reflective of, to you, John Landis, I guess, in terms of this moment in American film comedy, or in general about his aesthetic, your understanding
of it?
Well,
I think, and also, can I briefly give my opinion of John Landis in general? He's somebody I quite enjoy his films. There's some I really love, like The Blues Brothers, I think is great, and Into the Night, which a lot of people don't like, but it seems like people come around on eventually. Animal House, of course. And American Werewolf in London, I think, is a great movie, but that movie scares me to death, and I just can't love it as much as I should, because it literally scares me. It's the scariest movie I've ever seen.
That's I think we talked about the whole notion. Have we talked about the notion of horror comedy in the past?
Yes,
I think
and
on
I don't think that. And Rob Zombie's the only one who can do it. Yes.
Right. Yeah. We did.
But yeah. So that's, I think. But I'll say not only because of the whole Twilight Zone mishap, which also it should be said, and we'd probably do a commentary of that movie at some point, because I think it's an interesting movie. But that his segment in general is not good, and it's the worst one of the group. Kind of really the only one that isn't even good, I'd say. All the other ones are actually pretty good.
I think it's passable, but it's very easy and obvious and kind of rote. But
but anyway, other than that, I think he's kind of the original Tarantino in a way, of the sense of he's smart, he knows it, and he's kind of an annoying guy. Yeah, I mean, and he's fun. He's a funny guy. and a nice enough guy. He's not like Tarantino where he can like be hostile towards people in interviews and stuff, but he's just a know-it-all kind of guy, and he shows that. But so that's my opinion on him in general.
But you read this as well. Lynn's portrait of him is quite fascinating because he really paints him as someone who's almost larger than life to work with, but immediately kind of draws you under his spell. And Lynn really thought the whole idea was silly of making like a board game into a movie. But the way he tells it, it kind of just shows you how Landis had this atmosphere around himself that would just suck people in and want him to work with him.
And as far as the movie, I'm glad you asked me that question because I've thought about this here and there about what this, like you said, how does this fit into kind of Landis's oeuvre? I think it is the horror comedy nature of it, is that the movie's not a horror film. But I've said before, or when I said last week, that the movie kind of scared me when I was younger when I first saw it because it has especially the early goings, it has this nature about itself that's very dark and mysterious and brooding, and like I'll talk about it in the movie, certain moments where that happens, but that there's a lot of comedy related to the macabre and death, and there's a moment that was mentioned in one of the reviews that of course is in the movie as well, and towards the end of the movie where there's like that part where there's like 3 or 4 murders kind of happen simultaneously, and then they go and find the bodies, and it's a really funny scene, but they just kind of look and then walk out. They like don't react to the murders anymore because there's been so many murders up to that point that they just kind of stand there and look and then walk out like they're bored by the death at a point. And I think that is very indicative of Landis. And even though it was written by Lynn, I feel like a lot of the comedy is very much Landis comedy, both the slapstick nature of itself, but also some of the one-liners and kind of things that happen. So I think it actually does really fit into that, even though it is a period piece and it's not normal. Landis doesn't normally make period pieces.
But Animal House is
that is a period piece as well.
And one way that, to me, it's very similar to Animal House is that there's not like a slob aspect to this movie exactly, but there is like a slobs versus snobs, making fun of the wealthy, making fun of the privileged like aspect to this movie.
And there's sections of the movie that are very base level comedy, like the dog crap on the shoe and stuff like that is more juvenile comedy, that the people themselves are not juvenile, but what ultimately, and we can kind of talk about what the movie is about in a way in a moment here in a little bit, but that what you reveal about the characters is that they are of this kind of upper crust in society, but they're all dirty, grimy individuals who are all, corrupt and trying to do all these certain things that are very base level, awful, very crude kind of things that are kind of hidden behind this, like, I live in Washington. We all live in Washington and do these things in Washington. Also, the fact that Lee Ving, who was in that band Fear, the punk band Fear, is in the movie as like a rich guy, I think says something of that too, of like what he literally is in real life is not what he is in the movie. So even that is maybe a meta nature to itself. So yeah, maybe that's what it is about, like you said, kind of comparing that to Animal House. I think that it fits into Landis's oeuvre in a way, is this like veneer, like gold-plated dog crap in a way. It's like, which is not even that sounds like it's like an insult to the movie or Landis, which I'm not meaning it to be, but kind of this like specific nature of comedy that he was delving into in that period of time. And was really influential on a lot of other things eventually later.
Last thing I'll say about Landis before we move on. Landis is a very televisual filmmaker in the sense that Joe Dante, that kind of generation of filmmaker were really among the first generation of directors who were raised on television to start making movies. And so there's this frenetic, fast-paced nature of a lot of Landis's films that, while also indicative of like early screwball slapstick comedies from the 30s and 40s, to me also reflect a sense of, got to change the channel, got to keep audiences moving. Because the brain of the filmmaker itself is all about moving on to the next big thing, big thing. And I think that, first of all, I do like this movie. I think it's successful in a lot of ways. The whole nature of the endings, which we'll touch on here in a little bit, I think reflects this whole nature of like, well, you can choose this one, you can choose that one, you can kind of choose whatever you want, like, and that there's not necessarily sometimes as focused of a vision as I sometimes want, and this is, I think, indicative of other Landis movies as well, even ones I quite like. I think of even something like Blues Brothers, which I really like. The fast-paced, frenetic nature of that is just almost sometimes threatens to unravel the movie. You have some movies directly like Kentucky Fried Movie he directed, or he co-directed, of course, Amazon Went on the Moon with a great many of these other directors, Dante, Carl Gottlieb, some others, who... It literally reflects the experience of watching television, and someone is changing the channel, and you're moving on, and like you're not really dwelling on things.
Control,
and then the Zucker movies of this time, the ZAZ movies, which they were involved, of course, in Kentucky Fried Movie. Then they went on to make Airplane, which Airplane feels like it could have been a John Landis movie, but it's from the Zuckers.
And the whole idea of that movie is like your primetime movie, Airplane, like made for TV movie version of such a thing. So I do think that this movie, in its own way, especially some of Landis's other official directorial efforts, and reflect this kind of televisual generation. Also, it should be said, we haven't said anything about Thriller. He, of course, directed Thriller, which many consider, if not the greatest music video of all time, certainly maybe the most influential. So he had a hand behind that. So, anyways, moving on through the cast, though, who are some of the big quickly, I guess I can explain what the...
Yeah, sure.
So, as we all know, if you don't know what Clue, the game, or Cluedo, I'm going to keep saying that because it's hilarious to me, that the game's very simple. It's basically what the movie is. I'll explain what the game is, but there's a whole backstory to it, but basically that there are these 6 individuals who've been called to this house. I think originally it was about the reading of a will for Mr. Body, who lives there. And he is mysterious. He's killed, and nobody knows who it is.
It's Mr. Body. It's like, who cares what his name is?
Yeah, exactly.
He's the body. Like.
But that it's one of the 6 people.
Yeah.
And they're all named. It's like Colonel Mustard, Professor Plum, Mrs. White, Mrs. Peacock, Miss Scarlet, and Mr. Green. So it's all these kind of different, colors, names. It's very basic. But basically in the game, you get to go throughout these different rooms, and you have these cards, and you have to like figure out basically who killed Mr. Body with what and in what room. Then there's these weapons, and there's these different rooms. So, initially, I don't remember what the situation was, where I guess it was that somebody approached Landis to want to do the movie?
I think it's Deborah Hill, which, of course, is a very famous producer.
Yeah, produced, I guess, the Halloween films and a lot of other things.
Partner with John
so I guess it's kind of like he was trying to figure out how to do it, and he had the whole basic idea that essentially what the movie is, but he called in Jonathan Lynn.
I think he thought it seems as though Landis thought the movie would write itself, because it's like the board game. You have all these characters it could be, and the what room, and the murder weapon, and it just kind of writes itself.
It seems in itself that the video game would have had to have been inspired. The board game would have had to have been inspired by either, Agatha Christie-esque literature at the time, or a lot of like 1930s and 40s mystery, which was itself inspired by Christie. So I think he understood it as, this all kind of writes itself. It's all, a basic mystery thing. But to actually have to do it is tough, and that's why I guess he called in Lynn to try to figure this out for me.
So much of the movie too, you mentioned this earlier in our off mic conversations, it sets itself specifically in the 1950s in the midst of McCarthyism, the Red Scare, 1954, I think exactly.
Yeah.
And so it uses that kind of as the skeleton backdrop to put everything else on top of.
Which I think is very shrewd, especially for a movie in the 80s that's like 30 years before.
Which we talked about with 16 Candles. I think that there was a lot of 50s nostalgia in the 80s, and so it kind of nicely lines up as well. And of course, again, I think Landis was born directly in 1950, and so again, this would have been part of his childhood itself. I'm not sure how old Lynn was, but
it doesn't really apply. A lot of people like to say things like, it applies to the 80s itself. I don't think it really does that politically, because even though you could say maybe it would, I don't know. But I'm not even frankly interested in.
I think it does more in its form than it does its plot or narrative.
That's what I'm saying. It's politics is what I'm talking about. I'm not even frankly interested in even trying to think if it does. But so basically therein, it's kind of the similar situation where these people are called to this house. They don't really know each other, but they actually all certain people know each other, it turns out, but they're all basically being blackmailed by Mr. Body, who has all this dirt on each of them, who are basically all involved in some various ways of corruption in Washington, D.C. It's somewhere in New England. I don't think it's very specific about where it is, the house. It doesn't say. And, of course, there's a butler who is totally created for the movie. So we'll go through some of those people. I guess, this is in like alphabetical order, so we can kind of go through these specifically. Eileen Brennan as Mrs. Peacock, the wife of a U.S. senator who's accused of taking bribes. I'm trying to remember what some things Eileen Brennan's been in. Oh, she's in the Last Picture Show.
Yep.
She's been in certain things. Let's see if there's other. I want to look at some other things here. Hang on a second.
She was in Private Benjamin, the Goldie Hawn movie I haven't seen. But
Daisy Miller. Looks like she was in a lot of random. Scarecrow.
Yeah.
Which you've seen. I haven't seen that.
If you got YouTube standing by, which we all do now on our phones, go look up Scarecrow, like Al Pacino running scene where he's just like running in a department store.
She was in Texasville as well, I guess, is the same character. Right. She's in a lot of random stuff. I remember her being good in this.
I'll go and get this out of the way.
Yeah.
I've only seen this movie in its entirety once, so there's some of these things that I'm going to have to be reminded when I'm watching it.
But, let's see, what was that? Okay, she was also in Divorce American Style.
Which has always been one of my favorite titles.
Yeah. I'm guessing it's sort of like the Divorce Italian Style stuff at that time. But yeah, she's good. I mean, there's a specific thing I want to talk about at the end of the movie regarding some of the endings. And we'll talk about the nature of that here in a little bit. But yeah, she's good in this, just not as immediately. She's one of the ones that's a little more forgettable as far as the main people go. Colleen Camp is Yvette. She's it says a busty maid. Formerly worked as a call girl for Miss Scarlett and was recognized by Mrs. White as the mistress of one of her husbands. So this is another thing where all these people know each other.
Yeah.
She's pretty good in the movie, I guess. I want to see some things. She's in the Police Academy movies, I believe. She was in Apocalypse Now. Die Hard with a Vengeance, Election, American Hustle. She's in a lot of different things. Let's see who she was in Apocalypse Now. I'm thinking I know who it was. Yeah, she was one of the playmates in that.
She's also, her first movie uncredited was Battle for the Planet of the Apes.
Oh, yeah, it's Julie, uncredited, like I said. So, yeah. She's not in the movie as much. She's one of the, like, people who work at she's one of the maids, so she's in the movie a good amount, but she's, like, not one of the main group of the guests. Tim Curry as Wadsworth, a butler who once worked for Mr. Body and is seeking justice for his wife. He is revealed to be an undercover FBI agent in two of the endings. Oh, spoiler there, I guess. And the true Mr. Body in the third. So,
now, there are a handful of performances and actors I really remember and associate with this movie. Tim Curry would be one of those.
He's the main.
Let's hear your thoughts on Tim Curry. I know you're less.
I don't really like Tim Curry. I know he's one of the most randomly beloved actors by a lot of people. I don't really.
I think in part it's because, and we're going to talk about this later, he's in a lot of quote cult movies.
Yeah.
I think the most famously Last Picture Show.
Rocky Horror Picture Show.
The inferior.
Yes.
Picture show.
Yes. And it is, by the way. Don't come at me.
But he's in that, of course.
By the way, we haven't even seen Rocky Horror Picture Show, but it just.
But there's no way it's better than Last Picture Show.
So anyway, moving on.
He plays the original TV version of It. He played Pennywise. What do you think of his Pennywise, by the way? You're
well, I think I've said that
before
when we talked about on our literature podcast when we talked about reading. I think that it's low-key awful.
Okay.
Well, I don't know, maybe awful, but I just don't really like it. I think that I get what he's going for. It's comedic, but I just really think that Bill Skarsgård's was really good.
Yeah.
He got more of what it was, I think. And
he was Tim Curry's also almost the voice of Joker on the Batman animated series.
Yeah, he's also the voice of Dr. Calamitous in Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius. So, important to know that.
So, anyways, he's in a lot of cult items, and he's really beloved. What do you think of him in this movie?
I think he's fine, but I think he's too loud, he runs around a lot. It's very much that seems like Landis himself, almost in a way. Like it's. I
also think of him a lot too in Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. He plays like the chief antagonist, if you want to call it, in that movie, in the hotel.
Yeah.
Anyways.
I mean, he's okay. I think that he pretty much runs the riot, so he kind of has to be in the movie, I guess. But yeah, and that's another thing. I guess I kind of spoiled part of the endings, but I mean, I'm assuming you've come into the movie here, and we'll probably talk about the endings actually before we even get to them. Certain things I'd say about them, but yeah, I mean, we can talk about him throughout as well. Next actor is Bill Henderson as the cop, who's an unnamed police officer whom Miss Scarlet has been bribing. It looks like he's also a musician. I feel kind of stupid. It looks like he's made a lot of music.
Bill Henderson.
Yes, he's a jazz singer. Yeah, and,
okay, that's what he's honestly more known for.
Yeah, I think so. But then he's also in a lot of movies. I'm gonna go through some here. Let's see: Silver Streak, Get Crazy,
Fletch,
Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai, Across the Eighth Dimension, Fletch, This, Murphy's Law, City Slickers, White Men Can't Jump, Maverick,
Lethal Weapon 4,
yeah,
Conspiracy Theory.
Oh, is that that movie with
Mel Gibson?
Yeah, Mel Gibson. Yeah.
2 straight Mel Gibson joints.
Right. And then he's done a lot of TV too. Happy Days, Benson, The Jeffersons, MacGyver, Hill Street Blues, Facts of Life, NYPD Blue.
Again, I've only
ER,
seen this movie
Malcolm and Eddie, Seventh Heaven.
Once years ago. I have no memory of him at all.
He's in it here and there. He's not in an awful lot of it, but yeah. Anyway, he's not one of the more memorable characters. Howard Hessman as the evangelist / the chief, uncredited. He's basically this guy in every version of it. He's like a cop that shows up and busts everybody, but he's a little bit earlier in the movie where he like comes and he's like what's that thing? It's like the end of the world. What do they call it? Like, apocalypse is at hand, or basically like the Book of Revelation is at hand. Blah blah blah. But it turns out, he was actually a cop all along. Don't have a whole lot to say about him. Madeline Kahn is Mrs. White, the widow of a nuclear physicist who died under suspicious circumstances.
Now, this is another one of the actors I most remember and comes to mind. Madeline Kahn, of course, great in Young Frankenstein, smaller role in Blazing Saddles.
She's been in here too,
No, another thing I was thinking about with this is if this movie had been directed by Mel Brooks, speaking of, I don't know if it'd necessarily been better, but it would have been,
because she was in a lot of Bogdanovich stuff, What's Up Doc and Paper Moon, and then also Young Frankenstein, High Anxiety, History of the World Part 1, and Blazing Saddles. And then let's see, she's also in this, Nixon, randomly. I wonder who she was in that. Let's see.
We're going to be watching this soon.
Yeah.
It's been highly anticipated in this household, Oliver Stone's Nixon.
She was Martha Mitchell.
Okay.
Interestingly. But anyway, she's really good in this. She's, I think, the funniest thing in the movie. The way she acts is so, like, aggrieved and, like, she never, like, laughs or anything. She's, like, very, like, uptight and, like, offended by everything people say about her. And she's one of the best things about the movie, I think. She's very funny. Jeffrey Kramer is the motorist, Colonel Mustard's former driver during World War II. He's randomly Hendrix in Jaws. And is also in. There's some other random thing he was in. Looks like Jerry Seinfeld there. Mm-hmm. What was that other thing he was in?
MASH.
Hollywood Boulevard. Show. I was thinking of that we saw recently.
Yeah.
And he was on MASH. He was on Barney Miller as the stick-up man. Beretta, Jaws 2, MASH. Yeah, he said Halloween 2. I forgot that. Yeah, he's in that. Was he in the Burbs? Yeah, he was in the Burbs as a voiceover actor. I don't know that, but yeah, he's just barely in the movie. Of course, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey. Jaws, of course. Yeah. Christopher Lloyd is Professor Plum, a disgraced former psychiatrist working for the World Health Organization. We haven't, I think, ever really talked about Christopher Lloyd on here, have we?
I don't think so. No, he's of course a quintessentially '80s actor. Yeah. I mean, when you think of him, you instantly think of Doc Brown in Back to the Future. Think of him also in Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
We recently rewatched. We mentioned this in the past. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which he's of course in younger.
Right.
Who doesn't love Christopher Lloyd?
Oh yeah.
As the villain, also in Dennis the Menace, we always we
also
that from
did
that
you
a
just
lot.
say Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Did you say that one too? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, him in that movie is very funny.
I don't remember him a lot in this movie.
He's pretty good in it, but he's just not as immediately memorable.
Now, Professor Plum, he's kind of the nerdy, like former, as you said, former physicist working for the World Health Organization. So, again, for suburban commando fans out there that, be a nerdy scientist, he's really good at playing.
Right.
A movie in which he was frozen today.
Yeah. Now, that's a movie I've seen. You haven't seen that.
No.
Really pretty bad movie, but I think it's very indicative of a time period where it was like 1991 or something like, or 90. No, I think it was 1990. And it like had Hulk Hogan in it, obviously. And then it also had Mark Calloway, the Undertaker.
When he was just then
right,
starting.
Right. So it's very weird that it kind of is very much part of that like late 80s, early 90s.
Well, it also
WWF,
features one of my favorite random cliches or things in movies of like, especially in the early 90s, of all the characters in the movie talking about, it's the 90s. This is the 90s now. And famously that...
this is the 90s. We're going to sue you.
Yeah.
We say that all the time.
And then I think it's Die Hard 2 came out in 90, I think. And there's several points about like, Bruce Willis says this or that about, it's the 90s or the 90s. Yeah. It's just like, okay, we get it, like the 90s. I guess it was a big deal because they were coming at the end of the century, I guess.
And the end of the Cold War, randomly, too. But, you know what's funny about that movie specifically? We don't need to talk too much about Suburban Commando, but because there's a lot of other Christopher Lloyd movies we could be talking about. But that movie, that we had seen the trailer for it a million times on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, The Secret of the Ooze VHS, which had that, and then also Step Kids, also known as Big Girls Don't Cry, They Get Even. And those trailers...
It's a story for maybe another day, because there's a high likelihood we will be watching that at some point on here.
We watched that pretty recently.
But so, as you said,
anyway,
on the trailer for that, it's just Step Kids.
Right.
And so for years and years, we're all Step Kids, but then you try to look it up, and it's a little weird.
And it'll come up, but
and it's, as you said, renamed to Big Girls Don't Cry, They Get Even.
Yeah.
It's very weird.
But so that, and then the Suburban Commando trailer of, big things of, like, those movies where we would quote those trailers a lot randomly of, this is the 90s, we're going to sue you, is just hilarious. But,
anyways,
Christopher Lloyd, yes. Michael McKean is Mr. Green, who is a State Department employee who is a closeted homosexual, and, as it turns out, in one of the three endings, an undercover FBI agent.
Now, Michael McKean's another one of the actors I most associate with this movie. Michael McKean, great in everything.
Yeah.
Better Call Saul.
I think he's probably consistently was the best. And I love that show. I love everything about it. I love that way more than Breaking Bad, too. And I think he was consistently the best thing on it, because he's not on it anymore, of course. But
and the show's still great.
Moved
on,
right.
But he was such a powerhouse performance on that. And again, he's great in general. He's of this era in particular. I think he was part of that cast that came on for like a year on SNL to basically save it. It was like him and Martin Short and maybe Harry Shearer and like some of them comedians.
And he's kind of course, part of that whole like, his name just left me. I feel so. Christopher Guest, like stable.
He's in those movies,
right? And they were both
Spinal
in This
Tap,
is Spinal Tap, and like those, Best in Show and that type of stuff. So
one of the great Twitter presences also. Michael McKean.
Well, I mean, one of the all-time great moments of all time was he's married to Annette O'Toole, and they were like going to the Emmys, and somebody was filming them outside their car, and they were like, "Where are you headed?" And McKean's like, says it in this very specific voice. He's like, "Going to Disneyland or whatever," and she's like, "No, we're not. We're going to the Emmys." And he looks at the camera and he shrugs. He's like, "Oh, whatever."
Well, whatever.
Like, it's like, he's like, "I don't want to go."
I think I'd rather go to Disneyland than the Emmys.
Yeah,
too.
but he's like, "Oh, whatever." But he's I think the best thing about the movie overall.
And honestly, the most memorable thing in this movie in my memory is the ending of the third one.
Yes.
Featuring him and his line that he says kind of at the very end.
Well, I'm going to talk about the endings more specifically, because I was actually going to wait until we got to them at the end of the movie, but since we've kind of already spoiled some stuff, and you should have seen this already, so if you haven't, whatever. And by the way, it's just a stupid movie. Who cares if it's spoiled for you, by the way? I mean, no offense to the movie or you, but just like, who cares if you've been screaming at me because of spoiling it? I don't care. Anyway, yes, but I'll talk specifically about him in the movie here in a little bit, and how two of the endings leave that knowledge not unsaid in the end, but anyway. And then Martin Mull as Colonel Mustard, a war profiteer implied to be a client of Miss Scarlet's service. I haven't seen him in a lot of things, but we recently watched all of Get a Life, and he was on that.
I was going to mention this because he's really.
Let me see if there's some other. I know I've seen.
He was
him
in
in
Jingle All the Way. He was the. It's a gift certificate.
He's that guy. Yeah. And then Sabrina Teenage Witch, Arrested Development. It says on Roseanne, Danny Phantom,
now,
2.5 Men. He's a big TV actor.
I want to preface this before I try to take
this picture of him playing guitar.
try to take work away from Martin Mull because I remember him being overall good in this
Mr.
movie,
Mom.
and I like him in a lot of things I've seen him in. Imagine John Candy in this role.
Be interesting.
I think like he would have been a really interesting choice for maybe this type of part. Now, again, I'm not trying to take work away from Martin Mull. I like Martin Mull, but I was just actually looking at this cast a while back.
That's interesting. I never thought
and was
about
thinking
that.
about other actors of various roles, and that was one I was like, what if John Candy could have played that part? It could have. I don't know if the movie would have been better, but just something.
By the way,
to think about.
it's important to note that he was Richie Rich Sr. and Richie
Oh,
Rich's Christmas Wish.
I forgot about that. I just now remember that.
I didn't know that. Yeah. But anyway,
so I like Martin Mull. Don't get me wrong, but
How the West was fun.
Who's his? What's his credited character? DJ in Jingle All the Way.
And then Mrs. Doubtfire.
Justin Gregory.
Yeah. Anyway, he's good in this. He's a very man's man, military man guy.
Yeah.
You know. Kelly Nakahara as the cook, Mrs. Ho, the former cook of Mr. Body and of Mrs. Peacock. She's not in the movie a whole lot. She gets killed pretty early on. Lee Ving is Mr. Body, a man who has been blackmailing the 6 guests of Hill House and Wadsworth's wife. He is revealed to be the true Mr. Body's butler in one of the 3 endings. Now, Lee Ving, we've already talked about a little bit. He, of course, he was more obviously he's a punk rocker. He was in the band Fear. I have to bring up, of course, the film The Decline of Western Civilization.
Indeed it was.
Which is about L.A. punk rock of that time period, very late 70s, early 80s. And there's this really great song that he played in that movie and sang on.
I love living in the city. I love living in the city. My house smells just like a zoo. It's chock full of shit and puke. Cockroaches on the walls. Crabs are crawling on my balls. Oh, but I'm so clean cut. I just want to fuck some slut. I love living in the city.
Just lyrics that really speak to the soul.
And by the way, if you're like, oh, the kids were listening or something, sorry, but you've got to get that out there. Yeah, I mean,
we had to do it.
I remember when we watched that. That was about a year ago. We were laughing probably for 5 minutes uncontrollably at that. He's barely in this movie, but he's fine enough, I guess. He's a really grimy looking guy. Mm-hmm. He's still alive, so no offense to you if you're listening, but he's just
if you were a part of that scene at that time, you're still alive. God bless.
He was also randomly, I think, in that Walter Hill movie Streets of Fire, which I haven't seen, but which makes sense because that's a very punk rock-esque movie. What that movie's about, but I haven't seen it. But yeah, Lee Ving. I mean, his house smells just like a zoo.
Yeah.
So Leslie Ann Warren as Miss Scarlet, a sassy Washington D.C. Madame. Madam. Well, I went for the French version. Mm-hmm. Leslie Ann Warren, I feel like I've seen her in a lot of things, but I'm going to have to see what they are. Looks like she was in a lot of TV. Obviously, Mission Impossible she was on, it says. Victor Victoria, I've always heard of that. Mm-hmm. Songwriter, the Alan Rudolph movie. Looks like she's in. Let's see.
The Limey.
Oh, yeah, The Limey. I forgot she was in that Limey. Very good movie. It was really good. Choose Me. Oh, yeah, Choose Me. I'm a big fan. Yeah, so she's been in some Alan Rudolph stuff. I really like that movie a lot. I like Remember My Name a little better.
Love that. Yeah. I haven't seen Choose Me yet, but
Choose Me is very good. Obviously, Remember My Name has a very more intense, thriller aspect to itself. Choose Me isn't really that at all. But, Alan Rudolph, of course, was a big... disciple of Robert Altman. I think he was the co-director of or assistant director of Nashville. Yeah. And has had a long career of his own.
Geraldine Chaplin, who was of course staple of Altman's 70s films was in. The lead didn't
Right.
remember my name very memorably.
Looks like she's randomly in Burglar, the Whoopi Goldberg movie, and then Cop. So basically, Burglar had Whoopi Goldberg and Bobcat Goldthwait, and her Cop had, it looks like, James Woods, her, and Charles Durning. So
Okay.
you know that a movie where James Woods plays a cop, that he's got to be the worst person of all time.
Now, he's actually he was great in this movie, and he seems to be an overall apparently great guy outside of this in real life. But was it Rampart? No, Rampage? No, what was that Woody Harrelson cop movie? Oh, it was really good.
Yeah,
it was
for a second I thought you were talking about
cop.
James Woods. I was he's a great guy. I was like, dude,
no,
what?
but like Woody Harrelson. I mean, there's a lot of things people would jump to saying, "Oh, dirtbag cop." That is to me the Hall of Fame dirtbag cop. Up
I don't
Rampart
think I've ever seen
was
that.
the name of that.
Have you seen that?
Yeah,
Huh.
it was directed by that guy Oren Moverman, who made that movie The Messenger, which a lot of people liked.
Okay.
I didn't see that yet, but
Okay.
that's a really good movie. Anyways, Rampart,
Yeah.
co-written by James Elroy. Actually, I forgot about that.
Really? I love everything about
I mean,
this
listen
so
to this
far.
cast: Woody Harrelson, Ned Beatty, Ben Foster, Anne Hecht, Ice Cube, Cynthia Nixon, Sigourney Weaver, Robin Wright, and Steve Buscemi.
So I'm watching that like today.
It's
like,
a good,
yeah.
fun
Yeah, I need to do
dirtbag
that.
cop movie.
Yeah.
Anyways, I always put in my head him as the all-time
Right.
dirtbag cop I've ever seen in a movie, and
Yeah.
that. But there's a lot of.
But James Woods would have to
But
be
James
another one.
Woods
Yeah.
is.
I mean, he knows
famed dirtbag
right,
in real
other
life.
than not being a cop, but he kind of is a fascist, so it kind of works
Right.
out, in that sense that he would be like a,
So this
a-hole
movie,
cop.
Clue,
But
is
anyway.
stacked with all sorts of people.
one other person I wanted to mention was Jane Wedlin. I don't know if she's. Oh, was she a musician? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, she was in the Go-Go's.
Okay.
But anyway, she is the singing telegram girl, former patient Professor Plum, with who he had an affair. Of course, the big
A lot of
moment.
horny people in this
Yeah,
movie.
oh, yeah.
Affair
Yeah.
here.
Right. I mean, it's a very Landis movie,
Yeah.
but she has the great moment of, I am your singing telegram, and then gets shot immediately after, which is one of the funniest.
Candygram from Uncle.
Yeah, basically.
Again,
yeah.
Mel Brooks.
But yeah, so that's another random musician that's in this. But yeah, in the Go-Go's. But anyway, yeah. So yeah, a lot of random people in this movie, like you were saying. And then there's some other people, but they're not. They don't even have Wikipedia pages.
So they're not important.
Yep. Goodbye.
Except in the eyes of God.
Yeah.
So,
Of course. Which means everybody's important. But anyway, yes.
I feel like this is a natural place to go after the discussion we had last week on the Country Bears. Now, of course, Country Bears was based on a theme park attraction. This, while not based on a theme park attraction, is based on another one of our favorite words, IP, intellectual property. That was a joke. And
Yeah, I laughed. You didn't see it, but, unless you've got a camera in here that I don't know about, which is scary. But anyway.
inaudible chuckle.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk a little bit about this whole nature of a board game being adapted into a movie. How that might compare or contrast with perhaps a theme park attraction.
Yeah.
Again, going back to what we said about the whole conception of this movie, I have the feeling that Landis kind of assumed that this movie would almost write itself, because it's like, you have Professor Plum, and he looks like this.
Yeah.
You have Colonel Mustard, and he looks like that. You have Miss Scarlet, she looks like that. You have Miss White, and it's like that there are just these already just fresh out of the box characters that a lot of it relies on who you cast. And I think overall the casting was fairly superb in what I remember of bringing these people to life. But how does... I don't know, there's so many questions I could ask here. I'll try to phrase it like this. What does it... I'll put it this way, okay? How does Clue, the movie, compare to Clue, the board game? Is it faithful to that experience?
Well, first thing I was going to say is that I think you're right in what you're saying, because if you even especially the 2000s version of the game is what we've played, and it's pretty much the modern version, which was kind of a re-update of what the people look like.
A gritty
and everything.
reboot,
I guess. I mean, it was a little bit darker outside the windows.
But there's colorful still.
Yeah, right. It was a little bit darker outside the windows of the mansion, I guess. A little gloomier. But yeah, that you look at the people, the pictures of the people, and you know exactly who those people are, kind of like what you're saying. It kind of should write itself. And I feel like the movie mostly does that for the most part. But what was your original question of whether it was faithful, I guess? I mean, I guess so. I mean,
the board game itself feels like you're in a movie almost, in the sense of you're kind of adopting a character of sorts, the thing is, like, if you're playing, let's say I have Colonel Mustard and I'm moving around the board, and somebody like accuses Mr. Colonel Mustard of killing so and so in this room and this thing, it ain't like you're implicated directly in the game, which is weird. It's just a more neutral. Yeah, because designation.
It doesn't matter if you happen to have picked the character who's in there, because it's not like you lose the game.
But
you could,
when people do accuse or in that game, even it's a weird thing. Like if your character is accused, you feel a sense of they're looking at me, even though it really has nothing to do with your success in the game.
Unlike other games where that
and so there is a sense of role playing immersion that weirdly happens when you play that.
That also doesn't happen at the same time.
But I also want to run through some just other glorious cinematic examples of board games that have been adapted into movies. Looking at this list, this looks like the most serious early adaptation of an official board game that you can find. I think one that immediately jumps to people's minds, and this is kind of complicated because in the movie it is a board game, but originally it's based off that Chris Van Allsburg book, actually. Jumanji, which is probably the biggest out of all these, the biggest culturally remembered, I think, out of all these movies.
But like you said, it's complicated because it isn't exactly a board game. It was a book that had a board game in it that has since become a board game because of the book and movie. But and then Zathura is the same way. Yeah. I think that was written by the same guy.
Yeah, Chris Van Allsburg, and it's the sci-fi version where it's like, instead of being in a jungle and this survival adventurous aesthetic, you instead have a sci-fi thing to it. Some other ones as well. Ouija got adapted into a horror movie, I know.
First of all, what I want to say about that, I'm not even convinced that the Ouija board is a board game. It's more like a parlor trick. I don't even want to make it about it being satanic, but it's just like a mystical occult thing. It's not really a game, so far as I understand it. It's just, it's almost like spin the bottle, sort of, but that's not a board game, you know what I mean? So that's kind of complicated, but anyway.
But I have it on good authority, apparently. I've heard from people that I trust that Ouija Origin of Evil, which is technically the second one or almost a prequel of sorts, is actually good. I have not seen it. I cannot attest to this, but there's people who I trust who have told me this. I've heard this, so maybe it is. I hear really it's just a good horror movie that takes the Ouija name and does its own thing with it.
Okay.
Battleship, very famously a flop nearly 10 years ago now.
What's interesting about that one too is that it's even less like Clue. What's interesting about these other ones, for the most part, like Ouija and Jumanji and Zathura, is that they're actually playing the game in the movie. Right. But whereas Clue and Battleship are not that. It's like above it and is saying this is what's happening. What's funny about Battleship is that is literally such a non-game, almost. Not that there's no strategy, but there's literally nothing to Battleship at all. There's no story. It's literally there are battleships, and you choose randomly where it is. It's like if you made a movie out of what's that game where it has the little faces and you flip it.
What is that called? Oh, you're yelling at us right now.
I can't remember the name of that. Accusation.
No. I know exactly what you're talking about, though. I feel dumb too.
Whatever. It's like if you made a board game out of Operation or Battleship. It's like, okay, there's an operation going on, I guess. You know, it's like those are so broad that it just doesn't make sense, really. But that's what I think's interesting, though, about Clue is as an adaptation is that it there's enough there baked in to where it makes... Guess Who?
Yeah, Guess
Duh.
Who.
Anyway, that's like if Battleship's like you made a movie out of Guess Who. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. But so with Battleship, isn't it that there's like aliens or something.
Yeah,
like,
and I've not seen the movie. I don't really plan to
Yeah.
anytime soon, but I've heard that there are moments in the movie like, you sunk my battleship, where it's just like characters
Really?
say things that you would say while doing that.
It's just a stupid whole thing because, like I said, there's literally no story to that. Even Clue.
Clue has depending on the
right,
circumstances, almost a baked-in story as you're playing.
That's what I'm saying. So, but what's interesting, ultimately, I think what we're getting at of all this is that it's pretty much impossible to really adapt a board game into a movie, except for something like Clue. But even that, you have to invent, stuff, because in the sense of, like we were saying, it doesn't matter in the Clue board game why Mr. Body was killed. Nobody cares about that. It's about who and where and what, and about the fun of doing it, because you're doing it. But if you're watching a movie, you're going to have to come up with a reason for why they killed the person, which, makes sense as part of the whole Agatha Christie thing, right? And I feel like the movie mostly does that okay. And maybe this is where we should talk about the endings.
Sure.
There are 3 endings. First of all, what do you think about this?
The whole concept of multiple endings. I think, to me, this also, on the surface, is a fun way to get people to come back and see the movie multiple times, so it's almost a gimmick, I think, in some ways. But I also think that, again, it goes back to this point I was making earlier about this televisual aesthetic of Landis and Lynn in this case as well, that they kind of wrote themselves into a corner, and there is no, quote, definitive ending for who killed this person in this. That there can only be multiple options, because in that way it's trying to reflect the board game, but it's also to me trying to reflect a generation of people raised on television where it's like, oh, if I don't like that one, I can go watch this. If I don't like this, it's not quite choose your own adventure, because you're literally buying the ticket and it's going to take you on the ride and you're going to see that version. You're not like having multiple. You don't have the chance as the movie's watching to go, I want this, or I want. It's not like a dialogue tree in a video game,
Yeah.
It's just that is what it is, and it's like, okay, my ticket said A, so now I'm gonna go see what B was, and that's different. And I'll go see what C was, and that's different. So, I think it's kind of a gimmick. Thankfully, a lot of other movies didn't really try to necessarily replicate this, as a way to get people to see the movie. A similar thing, this is a random left field thing to say, but a similar thing was starting to happen in comics in the early 90s in terms of all these variant covers.
Yeah.
And you got to buy this one, you got to buy that one to get the quote definitive experience of seeing what it is.
But that's something you can look at on the front.
And so
I
I think that it's a little ham-fisted and kind of, I'll be honest, I think it's kind of dumb. I know a lot of people get really into the multiple endings thing with this. To me, it reflects a certain inconclusiveness about what the quote point of the movie is. You could just say, well, the point of the movie is just to have fun and just like, oh, it could be this or it could be that, and that way it reflects the board game. Why don't I go and just play the board game instead of like having this wishy-washy thing of what it? Do you for you, out of these 3 endings, is there a quote canonical ending?
Yes.
And then also, what do you think of this multiple endings thing?
Well, first of all, my opinion is basically the same as yours. It's a gimmick. It's kind of fun, but I think there's an inherent problem to the endings. First of all, there's 3 endings. 2 of them are extremely similar, and then the other one's totally different, and the other one that's totally different is the better one, and everybody says that it's the most interesting. The first 2, though, are that it's Mrs. Peacock and Miss Scarlet are the ones who murdered. Also, Yvette in the ending A, which is the Miss Scarlet one, Yvette also murdered the cook and Mr. Body on orders of Miss Scarlet. So actually, in that one, there's kind of 2 killers, but it's mainly Miss Scarlet. But don't you? And I want to talk about this. I don't know. Maybe we can talk about this when we watch the endings in the moment. Don't you think it's kind of strange that the 2 endings where it's kind of one person or both the 2 of the women?
Yeah.
What does that say? I don't know that says anything in particular.
Maybe it's an attempt to say that the only agency women can have at this point in society is to murder their husbands and to have some modicum of power, because in the 50s it's still very much a patriarchal, male-dominated society. I don't know.
And I don't know if there's any sexism inherent in that, or even feminism in quotes, but like,
frankly, you could look at it either way. I think,
but what I think, if anything, I think at its most neutral, it's just adapting the sense of the femme fatale,
Yeah.
generic noir
Right.
tradition. If anything, maybe it's
That's
doing
fair.
that. I don't know. But I think that's very strange, and I think it's random that they didn't pick one of the men to have done it. Not that I'm like, oh, men aren't being represented. I could give a crap about that, but I just think it's weird that it's not. It's
I've
two
never
women,
really thought
and
about
then
that.
it's everybody.
Because I can't really remember the details of A and B. I most remember C, as you were hinting
Well,
at.
yeah, and C is that everybody but Green did it. Green is the only person out of the main group in all the innings that didn't kill somebody, which also makes him my favorite character.
Well, in that way, that's kind of stealing from Murder on the Orient Express, which has a very similar resolution
where everybody
to that, where
killed.
everybody, but of course, oh God, what was that detective's name?
Poirot.
Poirot, played by Finney in the 70s version.
Right. And Kenneth Branagh in the Take Me, I Believe It version. Yeah,
and so it's kind of cribbing from that.
Right. No, yeah, and I think that's the most interesting because it also directly implicates Wadsworth. Because in the other versions, he's like an FBI agent or something, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. But, yeah, I'm not going to go into all the details right now because we're going to explain it, why everybody killed everybody. But basically, it's that everybody killed somebody, and they all go down for it. And, of course, that final line, it reveals that Mr. Green says, okay, it says here, okay, Chief, take him away. I'm going to go home and sleep with my wife. So the ending C makes, he actually wasn't gay, and that was part of his whole FBI thing, which, of course, you can read into this whole, homophobic nature of this movie, too, and it probably is, I don't know. But, yeah, so he's obviously, I think, the most, my favorite character because of that, too, is that it's like, that he's the only one that doesn't kill anybody, and he was an FBI agent or whatever. But interestingly, in the other two endings, he was a homosexual, I guess. So, not that, like I said, it's very weird the way it treats all that. It's kind of strange and kind of questionable. But anyway.
But this whole notion of the multiple endings to me, and I don't think this movie's as much at fault as some of the things that maybe come after this, but it does start to open the door towards like a sense of, quote, interactivity that the audience feels like they have with the movie.
Yeah.
Now, again, the only interactivity you have with this is literally what ticket you buy, because the movie is going to be the movie. It's not like you have choices as the movie goes along for this to happen or that to happen. But it does represent this sense of like audiences trying to take more control or ownership over the narratives themselves. Now, living in the days of video games, where video games are now considered high art and
for some reason,
and a lot and more so even than that they are the dominant art form that probably the most amount of people other than like television just consume on a regular basis in terms of narrative storytelling.
And TikTok, I guess.
Yeah.
Whatever.
But, we're so used to now, and this goes back to another thing as far as if you're talking about board games, and that way, even playing the game of Clue itself, certainly the movie, takes on the nature of sorts of a role-playing experience. I've played only like one real role-playing game in my life some years ago, and I had a lot of fun doing it. I'd like to play more. And I can't remember the name of it. It was like Red Alert or something. I played it with some friends. It was like based out of the 80s Cold War aesthetic. Right. And I had a lot of fun doing it, and you can create your own characters and all that. But adopting these roles, and this person is them, and they're not who they say they are, and like, this whole notion of who is who and who's telling the truth and who's lying, or are they who they say they are. And I think that we're so accustomed to that now, not only with video games, but you have now like cosplay. Yeah. You have people going to fan conventions, and even in online adopting certain personalities or certain traits about themselves. Yeah. That in a sense is people trying to reflect a sense of ownership and agency in everything now, that you have to be the center of the story. You have to be in control. Yeah. Now, again, I don't think this movie's going that far, obviously. It's just a very early version of that. But I do think it represents a slippery slope in terms of audiences feeling as though they have a sense of ownership and that they can alter the outcome of sorts. Right. Now, again, in this, you're only altering the outcome in the sense of what ticket you're buying. But I think of things to come, it represents an interactivity that I personally, people have different opinions about this, but I think as far as cinema is concerned, is frankly dangerous in terms of like, there is no, quote, real artistic statement. Well, this goes down a slippery slope because I think we can see the same movie. You can watch Wings of Desire and an audience can watch Winged as Desire. And you have a certain reaction and response to that, and other people have a reaction and response to that. That in of itself is interactive because the same thing happened on screen for you and that audience. But what happened in your brain and what you get from that experience is different, as it turns out, than the rest of that audience is, right? It feels personal. It feels like you. And I feel like as though if we're getting into the mode where we're literally altering the outcome of the movies themselves, there's a certain watering down when it comes to what is the, quote, narrative expression and or artistic experience of the movie. Yeah. Some may say that is more democratic in the sense that, it's breaking down and the audience itself can affect the outcome of the narrative. I'm a little less...
That's totally BS.
I would agree. I would agree with what you say.
Right.
I know there was a movie some years ago. I believe Francis Ford Coppola made.
Twixt.
Twixt. That
or was like editing it in the moment or something.
Considered a quote live cinematic experience. I think he did this mostly at film festival in particular. I think he did this at where he was kind of editing the movie as it was going on.
Seems like total nonsense. Toronto International Film Festival is where it premiered.
I'm wondering actually if this movie Distant Vision.
Oh, was it that?
Hold on a minute. I'm going to get this right because I don't want to speak bad of Francis Ford other than what I'm about to say about his artistic vision here. Let's see. No, it was Twixt. Excuse me. Where he was like editing the movie live for audiences. No, I think in certain like
but that's an
exhibition spaces and artistic spaces and museum spaces, such a thing can be fine. Of course, there's 24-Hour Psycho, which I think we've barely alluded to before when we were talking about our books episode that DeLillo famously took and draw out into a book. Yeah. But that's someone taking something someone else did and not necessarily re-editing it or changing it in the moment, but slowing it down so much that it becomes this other thing.
Well, that's an art installation. That's an art piece. It's not a movie anymore. But ultimately, what all this comes down to me, and I'm going to take it here because this is the logical step that we've gone to. Of course, you've seen, you got it here about Mosaic, that Soderbergh thing where you could like interact with it on your smartphone or something. We never did do that. It was on HBO, but and stuff like that, Bandersnatch, the Black Mirror thing. But what really happens with this sort of thing is that we've talked before about this idea of buy the ticket, take the ride, as Hunter S. Thompson said. He said a lot of other smart things, but I think that's the smartest thing he's ever said. Because what cinema is, whether or not you like it or not, is a ride. It is a ride that you go on, and you can't change anything about it. And it is what it is, and it's an experience that you have, and you can either like it or not like it. But there's nothing about it that you can change. It's not malleable to you. It's the artist that is giving it to you. And there's a lot of movies I hate, but you know what? And there's parts of me that would want to change them, but I would never do it because that's what it is, and that's what they wanted to do.
No, when I watch a Lars von Trier movie or I watch a Pedro Almodovar movie, as much as some of those things in those movies might offend me or disgust me, again, as you said, I wouldn't want to change it because, I'm in a weird way, I'm grateful that it exists because I'm like, well, this person had this artistic vision, they realized it. I might take issue with the ethics, the morality, or even literally the logic of the narrative. Yeah. I might take issue with that, but ultimately I'm grateful that they decided on it and they told me what it is. Yeah. And by telling me what it is, I'm not saying I have to accept their explanation of it, because of course art, once it goes out of the off the canvas, off the page, off the soundstage, wherever it is, it becomes another thing once it enters the consumer or the I want to think of another word other than consumer because that seems purely commercial, but the experiencer's eyes, ears, whatever. That can be another thing than what the artist tells me it is. But nonetheless, the artist did their work, and now I am taking in that work, and I'm either accepting it, rejecting it. Even if I reject it, I'm grateful that they made decisions and that I am going to have to experience those decisions whether I like them or not. Again, they make this, quote, objective thing. You watch it. I watch it. We maybe have different opinions on what it means, but nonetheless, it is a thing that exists that we can wrestle over and toggle with.
Well,
when you come to a movie like this, and I'm not trying to place all this on this movie because I think this was so many decades removed, and it's a slightly different thing than some of the things we're talking about. If you go see version A, and I go see version B, and we talk, and we'll get it all. The conversation becomes about what was different. What did you see?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, then we're not really talking as much about the movie itself. We're talking about things that are.
We're talking about the last 6 minutes,
right,
of each movie.
And
we're not talking about the rest.
Naturally,
of it.
some of that will filter into talking about what happened in the previous 80-some minutes. But I think that any conversations about these things get lost in, well, what was different this way or that way?
Yeah.
And then it's also like, well, is the quote meaning of the work, which itself is kind of a tough word to sort through, is the meaning of the work then altered when the literal content, in quotes, is changed in the work itself? And so, again, I don't want to place a lot of these criticisms on this movie in particular, but I think it does represent a slippery slope that was going to come about anyways. And again, isn't quite as interactive as some would maybe believe it is.
Yeah.
But it represents a changing of the form a bit that I do find a little bit worrisome.
Well, and I'm going to take it
especially
here,
with regards to the future of cinema.
Yeah, and I'm going to take it here because that's where I was wanting to go with it, is about this. Some people be like, why are you talking about that? But this is what it is. We live in this video game and internet generation where everything's malleable. You can change anything, and you can bully anybody into doing what you want, presumably. That essentially, you have two examples. You have everybody being pissed off about The Last Jedi and getting basically hijacking Star Wars into what all the idiots out there, and yes, that is what you are, scumbags, changing to the point of what The Rise of Skywalker was. That's also totally on Lucasfilm and Disney, that they had no clue what they were doing with those movies, and they didn't have a Cluedo about what they were doing, and totally screwed it up. Or you have the sense of literally saying, we want the Snyder Cut. Give us the Snyder Cut, which, by the way, didn't exist when they had to film versions of for Justice League, a movie I did not see the original or new version of,
Better off.
and am not going to do so. So that's ultimately what the big problem is, I think, is that we've gotten to where, we literally, I guess, can change what we want if we try hard enough.
And it's never in a good, positive direction, you know what I mean? It's never like for the right creative impulses. It's always for what the fans want.
Yeah.
So, like, was Clue made for the critics or the fans is the real question here.
Well, the critics didn't like it, so I guess
the fans did. This will transition into something else, and I think that's totally right on what you said about that. It's beyond even the creative impulses themselves. Now this sense of agency and ownership that certain fans feel as though they have over quote properties or quote IP, where they are literally, as you said, directing the directions of this or that property, which again has always been true to a certain extent in terms of what fans want and pleasing fans, but I think it's taken on this whole new dimension, as you said, in the internet age. But again, as you hinted at, there were a lot of negative reviews for this movie. Ebert, he gave it 2 out of 4. He was a little more middling. He was like, it's fine, whatever. But all of them kind of saw right through this multiple ending thing, and were like, I don't really.
Well, and
like
they talked
this,
about what
like,
we kind of talked about last week with the way that people talked about the theme park rides. They were like, why would you make a movie out of a board game? And I mean, the 80s was the most consumerist. Well, we're probably living in the most consumerist society we've ever lived in now, but it was
a
birth
transition
of modern consumerism. And it's interesting, that a lot that seemed like they kind of saw right through that, which is kind of good. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people didn't like this, and it actually lost money. It only made 14.6 out of 15, so people didn't go back to see it. And a lot of people said, I mean, maybe it would be good to go back and see it if the movie were any good. I mean, people said. So yeah,
but it has garnered a quote cult film status, and this is something else we wanted to talk about. We're not too much longer going to talk before we get to the movie itself. But quote cult film. What does a quote cult film mean to you, and what do you think about its overall usage when it comes to a lot of things?
Well, it's very complicated. There's a lot of things. Well, cult film can also be in the sense of the midnight movie. You have people like cult filmmakers like John Waters, or David Lynch, or
Well, speaking of those two, even take those two for example. Eraserhead and Pink Flamingos. I've seen Eraserhead. I've not seen Pink Flamingos. Are the two almost titans of the status of what the quote midnight movie represents,
and also Rocky Horror Picture Show. Also, but that's also has this. Well, this can go to where we're going. Has this whole commodified aspect to it that is beyond either of those two movies.
Right. And cult movie gets bandied around a lot. To what extent is Star Wars a quote cult movie? Because it has inspired, and I don't even mean in the totally negative senses, even though, yes, that too, a cult fandom.
Yeah.
Is a movie that spawns a fandom a cult movie, or is it? But can a movie that was the highest grossing movie of all time for some years even be considered a quote cult movie?
Well, I think the fandom's literally a cult at this point. They've, like I said, they've literally hijacked narrative like terrorists. They're like a cult. And I'd still even say deep down I'm a Star Wars fan, but I don't associate myself with those people.
Like a lapsed Catholic.
But everybody says they're a Star Wars fan. Like I said, it's like, so it kind of becomes meaningless. What I think in that sense, what I think a cult movie really becomes ultimately, and it's very complicated. I'm glad we're talking about this because you can have a movie like The King of Comedy, which was seen for a long time as not necessarily a cult movie, but like people are like, oh, it's actually really great. But then everybody kind of says that, so then it kind of becomes not that anymore.
Well, quote, underrated, that has another relationship to cult film status. Right. Where as you said, King of Comedy for many, many years was, that's Scorsese's most underrated movie, so underrated. And then it's now considered among his best, so it can no longer be a cult movie. And that's no shot against King of Comedy. It's just like, if you get called underrated for so long, you no longer can be underrated if certain artistic circles have garnered you to be the quote big, great work. Yeah, and like
Alex Cox is another filmmaker. I'd say is a cult filmmaker relatively. I just wanted to insert that in there because I forgot to say. I mean, there's a lot of cult filmmakers you can name, but what I personally see, it can transcend the cult status of itself eventually, a movie, but I've just been thinking about it because I just watched it yesterday. But this movie, the McPherson tape, which is I won't go into all the details of it. It's basically, a lot of people call it the first kind of found footage movie. It's about this family that's having this birthday party for this little girl, and aliens invade their area and abduct them by the end of it. That's a movie I feel like really is a cult movie because it wasn't known at all for a long time. And is just now kind of being seen by a lot of people because it was kind of finally remastered and re-released recently. But when I typically think of cult movies, I think of things like that are very unknown and have a very passionate fan base around them because that movie was adopted by the whole like UFO subculture and people actually thought it was real for a long time. And I mean, it's a very unsettling movie. I wrote a really long letterbox review about it today, so if you're interested, go find that, I guess. But what I think about it, but
the name of that's McPherson tape.
The McPherson tape, yeah.
You saw it off of Shudder.
I got Shudder. We got Shudder recently, and I watched it on there. But very interesting movie, very unsettling. But I had also some quibbles with it. But anyway, and I think often this happens with stuff like that, like horror movies or sci-fi movies or independent genre movies that becomes. Then you have things that happen with a movie like Meet Joe Black, where there's a strange cult around a movie like that, which was very much a mainstream drama that came
Studio
out,
movie.
But people didn't care about it, and then now it becomes a cult movie. So I think the status of a cult movie can become very malleable. I think this is still a cult movie, Clue, because it...
Well, usually an object of cult moviedom, not always, but typically is a movie that doesn't do super well when it comes out box office wise.
Right.
But then the years go by, a lot of younger people see it on home video, and it garners this, have you seen this? Have you seen that? And it kind of gets this certain status about it. The rise of the internet has made this even more trackable.
Because in the case of the McPherson tape or other movies like that, it was that people would literally pass around VHS, bootleg VHS tapes of it.
That's what's curious to me is when a movie that is a big studio movie and is even based on IP is a quote a cult movie. Yeah. Where people come back and talk about, it's actually so great, and can that be a quote cult movie or a movie like produced by Paramount Pictures? Yeah. Produced by John Landis.
It's an adaptation of a very famous board game.
And that's a, quote, cult movie. I think it can be. I'm not saying it can't. I just think it's curious when that happens. something like Batman Returns. Of course, Tim Burton's made several movies that maybe would be considered, quote, cult movies. I think Ed Wood's a movie that maybe for some years was, but has been so talked about, and so brought up as an underrated movie that I don't really think
and that Ed Wood
be.
himself is a cult. I would say Ed Wood himself is a cult filmmaker, certainly. His movies are not mainstream.
But something like Batman Returns, like that was a sequel to one of the highest grossing movies ever made when it came out. Had McDonald's toys made out of it. You know what I mean? Like, can that
I feel
be
like
a,
was
quote,
pretty
cult
well
movie?
liked at the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but
that now has this whole status about it as well.
I think that's what I'm saying. What we're ultimately getting at is the definition of this is insoluble or whatever.
Insoluble.
Insoluble.
Yep.
I'm a redneck. I can't say certain words like that. I don't know, but I think that this is, and I think that's something I continually question as well about. That's kind of another word like underrated. Gets into that kind of thing of like, what does that really mean, and what is a cult movie?
I think there's a reason for me that Eraserhead still remains like not only a great movie, but like on that kind of the upper echelon or the Mount Everest of quote cult movies, is that while you can get a shirt that has like Jack Nance's face looking real crazy on it, there's not this big merchandising angle to like something like that. It's only the movie. You have to see the movie. The movie is the object.
And
something
even,
like Star Wars, it's like, well, that's fun and cool, but like you can buy the action figures, you can buy the throw pillow, you can buy the video games. Like, you know, there's all this like merchandising aspect to it, even like Batman or like some big IP like of that quality. Even like Clue, you can buy the Clue board game.
Yeah.
Like, there's something to me, and I've not even really seen John Waters' movies either, but I just know what they are and what they represent that's similar to Lynch in the sense of like, while Lynch especially, his stuff has been merchandised out like, say, Twin Peaks or whatever. It's the attraction is first and foremost on the object itself, which is the movie, which is the cinema. And I think that to me is the true quote cult status.
Yeah.
Something like Big Lebowski, we haven't even mentioned that. That has this whole cult around that as well. But now they have like Lebowski fests and like people go and like dress up as their favorite Lebowski characters. This isn't even more niche than, of course, like Comic Con, which you have all these things you can pull from with Comic Con. Lebowski Fest is literally about characters in the Big Lebowski
people coming
movie.
Dressed up as the like nihilist band,
or the
that's
toe
like
that's been cut off.
Right.
I mean, and now it's this one-upsmanship that happens within that of like how niche can you get?
Like somebody probably will come up dressed up as the like 90 however many cent check that he writes for the milk.
I think that's been done.
It has.
I think so. Yeah. So
but
I mean,
so.
And so is that an aspect of cult fandom too? Is just to like one up one another?
Well,
about how deep or
I think the word that we need to use here is what cult literally means is a fanaticism over something. That I think that even in Star Wars there can still be a cult fan base of people who are fanatic about it.
Then you have the expanded universe, and people get all into that.
Or like obsessed. So I think that's ultimately what all this means is the way that I want to, I guess, my Levi Huffman's definition of cult movies is a fanaticism that grows around a certain thing. And I still think it can be more than that too, but I said a movie like Repo Man or Eraserhead, these people who are obsessed with the weirdness of that. And so ultimately, I think that's what a cult movie, I guess, is. It can be more than that or less.
I think that this all shares a relationship too, though, to this sense of ownership and this sense of fandom that we were talking about, even with these multiple endings and like choose your own adventure ideas. Of that, there's a certain point now in our pop culture that I think is unfortunately doused in the sense that it's all about the quote the fan experience, and it's all about the fans have all the power and all the control, and that these things share a relationship in terms of cult fandom, and then also this like multiple endings, choose your own adventure nature to popular storytelling now that just did not quite exist in the mid '80s, but in a weird way, Clue reflects a subtle turning of the page that I'm not even sure the people involved in making the movie were even aware that they were the hands moving that page.
Yeah.
So that concludes our discussion.
Well, I guess we should say why we're doing it.
Right.
Well, first of all, we talked about it last week. I've been a pretty big fan of this movie for a while, since probably around about 2006, 6 or 7, somewhere in there.
How'd you first see it?
I bought the DVD from Best Buy.
Did that have the multiple
DVDs.
endings?
Yeah, it had it all, and that's one of those things where, and I'm assuming this is going to be, the Blu-ray is going to be similar. We're going to kind of find out. This is going to be the first time we put the Blu-ray in, but that you could choose the randomizer, or you could choose where it's all of them, and we're going to try to choose all of them here. By the way, we're going to have to
talk about each other.
Yeah, but that I really liked it. I thought, I was pretty young when I saw it. I was just
what was it you liked about? Was it the vibe of the murder mystery story?
Yeah, I think that's what it was, and it was kind of creepy, and it, like I said, it kind of freaked me out and scared me, certain things about it. I knew that it was funny, but I didn't really I cared more. I kind of took it a little more seriously, but obviously it's a comedy. It's far more of a comedy than it is at all horror, obviously, and it's not horror at all. It's a mystery, but it has these kind of spooky aspects to itself. But the comedy outweighs that.
It's a good kind of. I would almost say also it's a good primer for younger kids or adolescents. Yeah. To maybe get into watching maybe more horror movies, in the sense it could be a gateway. So, that board game we played.
Yeah.
Look at this movie version of it. Right. And then it's like getting kids or young adults interested in that dark and stormy aesthetic that could maybe transition into horror, more traditional horror.
And so I've liked it for quite a while, but then that came to my attention that there is a kind of more modern cult fandom around it, which I don't. And believe me, I'm not here to necessarily say, "Oh, look at me, I've liked it forever." But
you were disconnected from that conversation.
So, and that probably was going on before then. But it seems like that's been, in my estimation, a 2010s thing that happened for some reason. But one thing, a story I want to tell very briefly that kind of gets at all this that we're talking about. Funny enough, is 2 movies we've been referencing. In college, I was rooming with these 3 other guys, and they're good friends of mine, and one of them, so that particular evening, one of them had 2 friends of his from high school were coming down to stay for like a Friday night or something, and we were, and one of the other guys and I were just going to watch a movie in the main room, and they were going to go in there and watch some movie in his room, and the other guy and I were watching Eraserhead. Now, I had seen Eraserhead before, but that was only the second time I was watching it. I got in the Criterion, and he had never seen that. And that's one of his favorite movies. He's a big Lynch fan now as well, and he really loved that. But randomly, the movie that they were watching in the other room was Clue.
It's so strange. Yeah, I forgot this story, and then bring up Eraserhead.
And they had recommended to that friend of mine, "Oh, let's watch that," and he was like, "Okay, I've never seen this," and he wasn't really into it, didn't really like it, whatever. I could care less, but I was like, "Oh yeah," but this sounds like a real, well, I've been there, done that kind of thing. But I was like, "Oh yeah, I saw that. I was a big fan of that years ago, and still kind of am." Okay, I'm watching Eraserhead over here though, by the way. So y'all go in that room and do that, I guess. Well, like I said, that sounds very condescending. I don't mean that way, really, but it's that and then they were seeing they would kind of come out and see some of Eraserhead, and they were like, yeah, don't know what that is, goodbye, basically. Like, and it was just a very weird kind of evening of programming, in a way, of like movies going on at the same time, and both kind of this cult status, and like it's very one more than the other, but so yeah, and that's a movie I think that other friend of mine that watched Eraserhead with me, I think he's seen this, I'm pretty sure, I don't know by now, but that I always meant to show him this, and I was like, oh yeah, we need to get to that at some point, because I quite like that, but I was like, oh, but Eraserhead's better, whatever, because that's what I want to say about this movie, is I really like it, but it has its problems, and we've kind of talked about that, and we're going to talk about it throughout, and it's not the most genius movie ever, like some people think it is. We saw a tweet just hours ago.
I was thinking about talking about this.
Go ahead. We'll talk about this, and then we'll kind of move on, but
this is literally a tweet somebody posted yesterday. I won't read the who
we won't give them any.
But but we were literally we're going to do this today. We'd already, and I saw this just yesterday. I'm like, okay, whatever. Again, if you're like us, you're on Twitter a decent amount. You see this random film Twitter conversations that pop up. I just want to say that Clue is a better movie than The Sting, and I'm not fielding questions. Have a nice weekend. So just like no debate, no talk about that. And I just love the idea that out of nowhere, off the top rope, let's go after The Sting today.
Which is a better movie than Clue, by the way. So,
and let me just say this too. Sometimes it's just this simple when it comes to movies. It's very nice when it's this simple. One movie has Paul Newman and Robert Redford. The other does not. You decide, America.
Right.
I don't know what else to say about that. I guess I don't know what there's not really a mystery element to The Sting. It is kind of a
they're both kind of caperish.
Something's being pulled over your eyes at some points, but it kind of reveals all that.
Well, that's all more of like a Ocean's 11 type movie,
right? So I was just very curious, why did
even,
this get brought up? Like I was just kind of shocked. I was like, okay, fine. It's not, by the way, but
that's a totally irrelevant opinion, by the way. If you're listening, no offense to you, but screw you, I guess. We didn't name you, so whatever. But I mean,
I was just scrolling through Twitter and I'm like, okay,
it feels like you've been punched in the nose. It's like, why are you going after The Sting? And I would even probably say I might even like Clue a little more than The Sting, but that's just because I like this movie. But like The Sting,
for me,
is better.
Clue again. I've only seen it once. It didn't especially make the biggest impression on me. I liked it. Again, there are certain performances I really remember from it. And again, I thought it was good. I thought it was fine. I was okay, and I moved on. Didn't really think much about it. It just sometimes happens with certain movies that other people love, and you're like, I don't even think it's bad. I'm just like, okay, sure, whatever. But the whole question of the endings a seed was planted in my brain about I don't know what I think of this in terms of, and I might even slightly change my mind watching it. I don't think so, but
and another thing about kind of what I have to say about the movie ultimately, and kind of what you're getting at, is I think it is the performances that I like about it.
I mean, the success of a movie like this, if you're going to make characters pretty, I won't say bland, but like. Not all that deep, two-dimensional. You cast people like this in it. So they did get that right.
It was a really good write-up that somebody wrote for Bright Wall Dark Room, Bright Wall Dark Room about Clue, and we read it, and that person said, in fact, see if you can find their name real quick.
Julia Selinger.
Yeah, Julia Selinger.
I'll put a link to this.
Yeah. Really good write-up, and they kind of talked about
Treadmill to Nowhere.
Yeah, they kind of talked about the movie of how it wasn't that like, but actually it's okay kind of thing. They were more defending it, sort of, but they weren't like overly defending it either. I think it's about.
I thought they were fair.
I think everything they said was basically correct, but she said something. It's there at the end. It said, and this is kind of why I like the movie. We don't play board games to rush to the end, nor to experience the same result every time. It's about the noise we create in between. Clue, for all its zany physicality and jabbing exchanges, honors the game's multiplicity of outcomes. When the movie's guests are seated for dinner, Wadsworth paraphrases Tennyson, unknowingly and morbidly summarizing the film's celebration of well-meaning, if ultimately meaningless, action. Ours is not to question why, ours is to do and to die. So, that's kind of the point of the movie to me, is it's like, it doesn't matter what, even still, like the game, it doesn't matter who killed who, why. It's all about the comedy that happens in between, and although it's pretty juvenile and kind of stupid, it's like Landis watered down. I mean, because Lynn wrote, no offense to Jonathan Lynn, but it's like somebody doing Landis cosplay kind of, and it's partly Landis but partly not. And even not all of Landis's comedy lands for me all the time either. I mean, so but it's more about that for me than it is about.
If nothing else, this movie's always going to have a. I think one of the reasons it will always have a cult around it is because of the multiple endings aspect, and like that there's not a quote canonical version, that it's ultimately there's three different versions and you pick what is your quote canonical. Even though most people jump to C.
Because the A and B are mostly ignored, and I actually really want to try to engage with those a little bit more this time around, because I rarely ever do, because I'm kind of like, whatever, these are useless kind of endings. But those are the endings that some people only ever saw, when you think about it that way.
That's what I'm saying. They might have walked away and go, that was lame.
Yeah.
And then, not thought about it.
But then there was another real good ending that they heard about, but they're like, but I don't want to have to go sit through all that.
Yeah, and they're like, why do I have to go... Well, I mean, again, I'm not trying to make this a class thing, but what about just struggling working class people who's like, all right, I've been working all month, I finally got a weekend off, I'm going to go see a movie, and that's not the quote, there's two other versions of it. Why couldn't you give me the real
The good one.
The good one.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a certain...
And now in the era of home video,
you can watch
thankfully
whatever,
you can do that like we're going to do. But that wasn't the case originally, you know. So, yeah, that's its own problem. I didn't ever think about it that way, but, yeah, it's just like with people who are like... Oh,
but people spending their hard-earned money to see something. Why couldn't you have just...
Movies ain't cheap. They weren't cheap
figured
back
it
then
out,
either,
decided, and just went with that one.
Yeah.
Again, part of it's this whole novelty thing I get they're trying to go for, but no. Not. So we're going to take a brief break. You're going to hear the trailer for Clue, and then we're going to dive right into the movie directly.
Every person in this room has the perfect motive.
Stand back!
For murder.
What do you mean? Murder.
But only one of these suspects is the murderer. Is it the timid Mr. Green?
Why are you screaming? Because I'm frightened of what? Screaming!
Or the militant Colonel Mustard?
If I was the killer, I would kill you next.
Huh?
I said if.
Mrs. White, who helped her husband on his way?
Well, it's a matter of life after death. Now that he's dead, I have a life.
Miss Scarlet, who's helped many men along the way?
Practice makes perfect. Huh.
Professor Plum, who's looking for a way?
I'm looking.
Mrs. Peacock?
I have absolutely no idea what we're doing here, but I am determined to enjoy myself.
Or did the butler do it?
No.
Paramount Pictures invite you to an evening of mystery.
Let us in! Let us in! Let us out! Let us out!
Murder.
This is getting quite serious.
And madness. In the movie that makes a scene of the crime.
So who did it?
Clue. It's not just a game anymore.
And here we are. We're back. One thing that always shocks me about this movie, I forget, is that it's rated PG.
Yeah, and I think that the PG-13 rating was like brand spanking new at this time. It was like 85, so I don't know what they were thinking, but...
In my head, it's a pretty, quote, adult movie. I mean, something that I guess kids could appreciate.
I mean, I did, but yeah.
Should it have been? Maybe you think they should have pushed the envelope and got it to an R? I know that would have hurt its box office chances even
probably. More, I don't know. It's kind of a movie without a definitive audience in a way too. That's strange. But yes, PG. No accompanying thing there as far as a description. This is before they did that. Yeah. Maybe singing telegram deaths. I don't know. Is what would have been on there.
So again, we're watching this off the standard issue, I guess, Paramount Blu-ray that they put out.
And that's how we're seeing all three endings.
So there's an option
there's an option to see all three. I don't know whether or not, if you're streaming this, I'd be interested to know which they picked. It probably is all three, I would hope.
Yeah.
But I don't know. So I'd be interested to know that.
Yeah.
But, oh well. Anyway.
All right, so we're going to hit play in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is a Paramount film, Gulf and Western.
Yep.
We have both types of music, Gulf and Western. As a reference to another John Landis product.
Paramount had a pretty good 80s.
Yeah. Pretty memorable score, to me at least. I guess not necessarily a great score, but a memorable one.
Yeah. You remember offhand who did it?
Nope, we're going to find out here in a second.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I always like when movies opt for the alphabetical order.
Yeah, it's a real good shuffle, you know?
Yeah. Because there is no like one cast member that to me is so overwhelmingly larger than the others in terms of their stardom. You know, they're not these. Most of these people aren't people you would imagine as the stars of a movie necessarily. Anyways, they're always good number twos or supporting. But and that adds to the nature of who did it. It could be anybody. You know, wasn't Jonathan Dett in Murder on the Orient Express, and he died very early
I didn't
on.
see that movie, but
the newer one.
Yeah, he was. He was the guy that got killed.
Yeah. I know on the 70s one, Sean Connery was in that. He was obviously coming off the Bond movies by that point. But
there's Pennywise.
Again, everybody's got their own Tim
Peters
Curry in
and
their
Goober.
head. Yeah, canonically in their head. George Folsey Jr., he produced a lot of Landis' stuff as well. And that's the thing. Technically, he was an executive producer. Like, he was not the main producer.
Right.
But still had a lot of power, obviously.
By the way,
yeah,
Parker Brothers.
But anyways, everybody has their Tim Curry in their head. Mine will always be Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, Tim Curry, because I've just seen that the most.
It'll be that or this for me, just because.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if they're going to show who did the music. I have to look that up. Yeah, I guess not. John Morris. Collaborated often with Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder. So
a lot of comedy stuff, especially.
It might have showed it and we missed it. That's probably what happened, but
maybe so.
You were probably screaming it at us. Like, duh, and I'm like, well, whatever. I said Deborah Hill, big producer, most famously produced the Halloween movies. I think she straight up directed Halloween 2.
Really?
I think so. Pretty sure about that. But the original Halloween 2. Like,
Yeah. Not Rob Zombie's Halloween.
Yeah, not a good movie, that first one. Now, you know what is a good movie is Rob Zombie's Halloween 2.
Actually, it was Rick Rosenthal.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, but she
was producer.
Right, I'm sorry, I forgot about that. But she basically, did a lot of it as far as the production of that movie. Anyway.
She wrote some movies as well, it looks like.
This movie also has a,
Halloween.
50s rock soundtrack.
Yeah.
New England, 1954. So.
Which I wonder if all these high society people in the 50s would really be listening to that.
Well, maybe Yvette would be.
Even the Help, I don't know, but yeah.
That's been something that's been weird. We've been watching The Crown.
Yeah.
By the way, would you put the subtitles in?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. On The Crown we've been watching.
Yeah. Which is what we've been seeing seasons 1 and 2, which is mostly the 50s, now into the early 60s.
Right, and there have been a couple times where there's been 50s, early 60s music in it, and it's kind of shocking because you're like,
so removed from
that's what's been going on in life.
In real world, yeah.
McCarthy on TV back there.
Joe McCarthy, yeah. 1954, I believe, was the year that he kind of actually fell from grace towards the end of the year.
Yeah, because actually it was just 1 or 2 days ago when that would have aired on TV, that specific thing. So I don't remember when that was, but in June. So why is it so cold in June? I don't know. So they probably just screwed it up.
Yeah, probably just generic McCarthy hearing.
So everybody smells his dog crap on his shoe. And who are you, sir? I'm Wadsworth, sir. The butler.
And I think in general these, mystery films, Agatha Christie-esque detective stories, will always have an audience because people love to just say, I think it's this person.
Right.
It's like an ongoing conversation.
Like
as
Knives
you're watching
Out.
It. Knives Out was a very
new
recent version of that, yeah. And seems to be one of the few generally grown, homegrown franchises that seems as those come to fruition in recent years. That's actually, frankly, what franchises could or should be more of.
By the way, of course, they're referencing the fact that their names aren't actually what they are or whatever. Yeah. They have other names. And...
Even, too, that is Mrs. White, and she's not wearing the, white in the same way the character does on the board game. And even Colonel Mustard isn't wearing the yellow
Well, what's funny about Mrs. White in the board game, I think, is maid
yeah.
or butler there. It's very confusing.
Yeah.
So whatever. It doesn't matter.
No.
So
the Clue heads.
Yeah. Sorry, Cluedo fiends. Yeah. What's funny is that they make new versions of Clue that are like totally different. Like there's probably like a Seinfeld related.
I know there's been like a
there.
Harry Potter Clue,
yeah.
which we have a version of back from the early 2000s. Which technically I would have played that before I read or played the original version, or you know what I mean, the classical versions, I should say.
Late for dinner. Me too. Where are you going?
See. Hill House, off Route 41.
Wait a minute, let me look at that. That's where I'm going. I got a letter like this.
Huh. What do you know?
As we said, who doesn't love Christopher Lloyd?
Yeah.
And this is Mrs. Peacock.
It's weird she's like not shown coming in, she's just there.
Yeah. Can you go and check that dinner will be ready as soon as all the guests have arrived?
Keep looking at her breasts.
Yeah.
It's like, okay. That was something that I kept seeing in all the reviews is how obsessed Jonathan Lynn supposedly was with busts of women or whatever. So.
Yeah. It's funny, he, works for the State Department. I had a professor in college that worked for the State Department back during the 80s, funny enough. So I wonder if he went and saw this and Maybe
was
he was
like,
a consultant.
Yeah, I don't know. He's a really smart guy about foreign policy. Yeah. But yeah, he was like...
It's kind of his whole job.
He was literally in the State Department at the end of the Cold War, and he kind of talked about a lot of stuff.
Time, yeah.
He talked about... did not sing Gorbachev, but when Gorbachev was in town at one point, and how basically he watched how the city moved around during that time was different in Washington or whatever. And but
it was a dark and stormy night. Looked like this earlier outside.
Yeah, it's not actually raining that bad now, but I shouldn't say that. It could turn into, could be worse, could be raining and then get worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that. This could have been a Mel Brooks thing, I think.
At this point, yeah, he was kind of the master of the quote spoof or parody movie of doing a horror movie or doing the western or doing a Hitchcock movie or the silent movie or
Professor Plum and Miss Scarlet.
Okay, like
of course, since you've each been addressed by a pseudonym, you'll have realized that nobody here is being addressed by their real name.
yeah, he's that old the Klutz character. Like, look, there's one in every crowd. Like, okay.
It's funny to think about, like a lot of 80s and 90s sitcoms, there were always the murder mystery episode.
Yeah,
like about Mama's Family, that one was actually in black and white.
Yeah.
And then
Boy Meets World.
Boy Meets World, that's more horror.
Yeah, right.
Horror theme. But then there was Saved by the Bell one.
Was there one on that, really?
Yeah.
The butler is head of the kitchen and dining room. I keep everything tidy. That's all.
I mean, again, this whole form is very malleable, rinse and repeat formula anyways.
Yeah.
Merely quoting sir from Alfred Lord Tennyson.
I prefer Kipling myself. Female of the species is more deadly than male.
And Miss Scarlet?
Sure, I'll eat anything.
So Christopher Plummer's Kipling.
Yeah.
We just watched the Man Who Would Be King the other day, and it was pretty good. So. Okay. So are you gonna like talk or not?
Yeah.
Like,
I want to keep something warm for you. Did you have in mind, dear?
Love everybody's so aggrieved and interested in her dimensions. It's just like, okay.
Yeah.
Like, even the women, it's like, okay. Like,
I mean, 50s. It was a different time back then, you know? Like,
yeah.
That's what's crazy is that the beginning of the 50s is now 70 years removed from now.
Yeah. Have you read And Then There Were None?
No, I actually haven't. I'd like to. I've seen stage versions of it done, and I guess some film versions maybe too here and there. But.
It's pretty good. Of course, that wasn't the original name. I don't think we'll go through some of those, but I mean, of course, Agatha Christie, racist like a lot of people. So, yeah, I like that book though. I'm not actually that crazy about the Murder on the Orient Express though, but
yeah.
I know. So everybody's turned up about the same time.
Yeah.
But nobody was late, except for the guy who's supposed to be there. The host.
This is one of my favorite recipes.
I know, madam.
So, what do you do in Washington, D.C., Mr. Green? Come on, what do you do? I mean, how are we to get acquainted if we don't say anything about us? Perhaps he doesn't want to get acquainted with you. Well, I'm sure I don't know, but if I wasn't trying to keep the conversation going, then we would just be sitting here in an embarrassed silence.
Are you afraid of silence, Mrs. Peacock?
Yes, what? No, why?
You seem to suffer from what we call pressure of speech.
We? Sweet. You shrink?
I do know a little bit about psychological medicine, yes.
Oh, you're a doctor?
It's funny how, like, everybody is so like, who are you? Who are you? It's like, can we not calm down a little bit? I mean, they're all craven, disgusting human beings, so I guess, but...
Another politician. Jesus. No, I work for a branch of WHO, the World Health Organization.
Well, what is your area of special concern?
Family planning. What about you, Colonel? Are you a real colonel?
I am, sir.
You're not going to mention the coincidence that you also live in Washington, D.C.?
How did you know that? Have we met before?
I've certainly seen you before, although you may not have seen me.
Just standing in the corner like...
Sure do. But does anyone here not live in Washington, D.C.?
I know.
Yes, but you work for the United Nations. It's a government job. And the rest of us all live in a government town. Anyone here not earn their living from the government one way or another?
Wadsworth, where's our host and why we've been brought here?
Something is afoot. I know that much.
I mean, his house smells just like a zoo.
Yeah. Cockroaches on the wall.
Yeah. Crabs are crawling in certain places,
Well, he does look so clean cut here.
Yeah. And he just does what... No, we'll quit.
Yeah.
He is so clean cut, though,
Yeah.
Have you ever seen his Fears SNL performance? It's like straight up low-key chaos.
No, I can't imagine him being on SNL.
It's very infamous, yeah.
In the 80s?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm guessing it's the early 80s, probably.
It's your advantage to be present on this date, because a Mr. Body will bring to an end a certain long-standing, confidential, and painful financial liability.
If he was being for real, it would be 10 times worse than Sinead O'Connor. What all that stuff she got in trouble for.
No, I just think.
Now, how did you know her name?
We know each other. Tell me.
Like, wow.
Forgive my curiosity, Mr. Body, but did your letter say the same thing? No.
What if his first initials P?
Yeah.
P body.
Am I interested in you in fruit or dessert? In that case, may I suggest we adjourn to the study for coffee and brandy?
They all eat that quick.
Our unknown host will reveal his intentions.
Well, there's no one here.
Please help yourself to brandy and be seated.
I was reading that apparently a lot of the interior furniture and or stuff on the walls, like decorating stuff, is actually from the Theodore Roosevelt estate.
Okay.
So it's pretty high dollar, valuable stuff.
Mm-hmm. For this movie, no offense to the movie, but it's like, okay, like it wasn't filmed on the estate.
No, it was filmed in Hollywood, it said.
Oh, okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm instructed to explain to you what you all have in common with each other.
All the interiors, which is by far most of the movie. So.
They know who I am? I don't think so. You've never identified yourself to them, I believe. It's a hoax. I suggest we all leave. I'm sorry, sir. You cannot leave this house.
This is randomly too like intense. This whole moment.
The doors are locked. This is an outrage. You can't hold us prisoner. Ladies and gentlemen, please return to the study. Everything will be explained. You too, Mr. Body.
His shoes.
Yeah.
That's real like 1950s. I'm a cool cat kind of shoes.
Yeah. Or if the heads back in the day were like checking off lists, like, ooh, in the, well, not the garden, but the conservatory.
Yeah.
Like, ooh, in the study, like, you know.
The lounge.
Yeah.
The billiard room. The library. Like, the kitchen. The dining room. The hall. Anyway. The ballroom. That's the other one. Yeah. She clearly has, like...
Anybody else wish to deny it?
No.
Very well. As everyone here is in the same boat, there's no harm in my revealing some details, and my instructions are to do so. Thank you, Yvette.
Goodbye.
Ah, the weak link. Goodbye.
Him as weakest link host.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Professor Plum, you were once a professor of psychiatry, specializing in helping paranoid and homicidal lunatics suffering from delusions of grandeur. Yes, and now I work for
It's obviously supposed to be.
No, your work has not changed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
You know what doctors aren't allowed to do with their lady patients?
This is 54. This has been right as the UN's wrapping up that whole police action thing in Korea.
Yeah, that whole thing.
Which is crazy that basically as many casualties in America as Vietnam did, but it was, you know, not nearly as big a deal in its own way. Except to the families of those who lost loved ones.
Yeah.
Greenbacks in plain envelopes under the door of the men's room. How would you describe that transaction?
I'd say it stinks. Well, how would you know? When were you in that men's room?
So it's true.
No, it's a vicious lie.
I'm sure we're all glad to hear that. But you've been paying blackmail for over a year now to keep that story out of the papers.
Well, I am going to believe you. I too am being blackmailed for something I didn't do.
Me too. Yeah, me.
Not me.
No, they're all innocent except
Oh, I'm being blackmailed.
Miss Scarlett.
But I did what I'm being blackmailed for.
What did you do?
Well, to be perfectly frank, I run a specialized hotel and a telephone service to provide gentlemen with the company of a young lady for a short while.
Oh, yeah? What's that phone?
Wow.
So how did you know Colonel Mustard works in Washington? Is he one of your clients?
Certainly not.
I was asking Miss Scarlett.
Well, you tell him it's not true.
It's not true.
Is that true?
No, it's not true.
So it is true.
A double negative. You mean you have triple F's? That sounds like a confession to me. In fact, the double negative has led to proof positive. I'm afraid you gave yourself away.
Are you trying to make me look stupid in front of the other guests?
Don't need any help from me, sir.
That's right. See what's so terrible about Colonel Mustard visiting a house of ill fame? Most soldiers do, don't they?
Please.
But he holds a sensitive security post in the Pentagon. And, Colonel, you drive a very expensive car for someone who lives on a colonel's bay.
I don't. I came into money during the war when I lost my mommy and daddy.
Okay.
I've always contested that mommy and daddy like sound fine with a southern accent, but anybody else saying it just sounds weird. But that's just
This
my
moment.
bias.
Why is that funny?
I didn't kill him.
Then why are you paying the blackmailer?
I don't want a scandal, do I? We had had a very humiliating public confrontation. He was deranged. He was lunatic. He didn't actually seem to like me very much.
That's what I love about Madeline Kahn in general, but especially in this movie. She always seems like she's at the seams of unraveling, and just like her her voice is always about to break, like in any moment.
Why is that funny?
Not you, Mrs. White, not you.
What did he do for a living? He was a scientist. Nuclear physics. What was he like? He was always a rather stupidly optimistic man. I'm afraid it came as a great shock to him when he died. Back at home, his head had been cut off. So had his,
You know.
I've been out all evening at the movies. Do you miss him? Well, it's a matter of life after death. Now that he's dead, I have a life.
Your first husband also disappeared.
But that was his job. He was an illusionist.
But he never reappeared.
He wasn't very good at
It's funny.
I'm not going to wait for Wadsworth here to unmask me.
Sorry, Adam West.
Yeah.
And I'm a homosexual. I feel no personal shame or guilt about this. But I must keep it a secret or I will lose my job on security grounds.
That was something that happened back then during sometimes the late 40s, early 50s loyalty review programs where they were trying to get a lot of government employees who maybe had some sort of a communist connection that some would be even more willing to go down as a communist than they would a homosexual, like, which is a sad reflection of that time. But
this whole moment.
And also another thing too is that the State Department was the biggest entity that McCarthy went after in terms of. I'm glad we're saying all this as he's getting hit in the nuts, but of McCarthyism.
Yeah.
Blackmail depends on secrecy. You've all admitted how he's been able to blackmail you. All you have to do is tell the police he'll be convicted and your troubles will be over. It's not so easy. You'll never tell the police. Then I shall. I have evidence in my possession, and this conversation is being technical.
Point of order, tape recordings are not invisible evidence.
Ladies and gentlemen, the police will be here in about 45 minutes. Tell them the truth, and Mr. Body will be behind bars. What are you getting this time?
What's funny is that it's more or less real time, actually, too, of how long it is. That's very rare in a movie where it's real time, 45 minutes, more or less. So.
Yeah. It's hard to accomplish.
Yeah. Not exactly. It's a little longer, actually, but not by like an awful lot.
Meeting you tonight. Did you know you were meeting us? What were you told precisely?
Merely that you were all meeting to discuss our little financial arrangements.
It's just hilarious to me that there's this like punk guy who's like, "Oh, look at me," like, you know.
So what's that guy that's in Roadhouse? It's
John Doe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like X quite a bit.
But yeah, he plays that like bartender slash cashier and Roadhouse.
Who's literally straight up taking the money and putting it in his pocket.
Yeah.
Like, it's so blatant.
It's like him in the movie, I would imagine.
The gun reveal, or the weapons reveals like the gun. Well, there is a gun, but
What's this for?
why would you want to kill somebody with a candlestick? By the way,
you're that desperate, I guess.
This is a pretty goofy whole thing in the movie where it's like they get the gun, or I keep saying guns, they get the weapons. It's like, it's more that they found the weapon in the game, but whatever.
That wrench.
Yeah. Really crappy wrench. He immediately shoots himself.
Yeah.
It's like, okay. Like... Well, if one of them has a DVD, a lethal weapon. No, a Betamax.
Yeah.
Like... You'll also be exposed and humiliated.
It's just hilarious that this is the guy that was in Decline of Western Civilization. I hadn't seen that at that point or knew that band when I saw this, but
yeah.
He has the key to the front door, which he said would only be opened over his dead body.
And I am body. There's some body here to see you. He's like, kill Wadsworth. But, you know.
The only way to avoid finding yourselves on the front pages is for one of you to kill Wadsworth. Now. It's not Wadsworth. Is he alive? Mr. Bobby. Stand back! Come here! Let me see. He's dead.
What? Who had the gun?
I did.
Then you shot him.
I didn't.
Well, you had the gun. If you didn't shoot him, who did?
Nobody. Look, there's no gunshot wound. Somebody tried to grab the gun from me in the dark and the gun went off. Look, the bullet broke that bars on the mantle.
he's so desperate to prove his innocence. I mean, I guess I would be too, but
How did he die? I don't know. I'm not a forensic expert.
Well, one of us must have killed him.
I didn't do
There's a whole thing in this movie, by the way, that's kind of... I think it's the case where, like...
Maybe he was poisoned.
it was poisoned in the middle of the dark.
Yeah. He, like, took a drink
Yeah.
in the middle... Yeah. Like,
Had to stop her from screaming. Was the brandy poisoned?
I can't remember if it definitively happens or not, but that sometimes there's, like, a...
Unless she dies too.
that you can watch certain scenes in this movie and that there's one person not there or something. It's like there's whole groups of people that, like, it's harder to tell that with or whatever. There's, like, somebody that's not with them or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It must be the murderer. Why would he scream?
He must have a victim in there. Oh, my God, he did.
Oh my God! You're alive.
No, thanks to you.
What do you mean?
You knocked me up with the murder, you idiot. So the murderer is in this room. Mais oui.
But where?
Where? Here. We are all looking at him. Or her.
Or her.
Yeah.
Equal opportunity killer.
How did you know he said that?
I was listening. But why were you screaming in here all by yourself? Because I am frightened. Me too. I also drink the cognac. Mon Dieu. I can't stay in here by myself.
Because I think Miss Peacock's not in the room right now.
Mm-hmm.
There is safety in numbers, my dear.
What a boob.
Yeah.
Plus, Tim Curry in this movie has this whole aura of, like, I know all that a lot of people find cool, but I find particularly
obnoxious.
annoying. Yeah.
This is absolutely terrible. It's not what I intended.
Oh, because she didn't walk down there, Mrs.
Yeah.
Peacock.
Not the butler?
I'm not the butler, but I'm a butler. In fact, I was his butler. So if he told you to invite us all to his house, why did he arrive late? I invited you. In fact, I wrote the letters. It was all my idea.
Wait a minute. I don't understand. Why did you invite us here to meet John Lay's employer? Were you assisting him to blackmail us?
Certainly not.
I think you had better explain.
Please sit down, everyone.
Gotta finally get around to
Yeah,
explain.
and then it'll become more
Yeah.
convoluted eventually.
my employment with him to an end.
When did it come to an end?
When my wife decided to end her life. She too was being blackmailed by this odious man who now lies dead before us. He hated my wife for the same reason that he hated all of you. He believed that you were all thoroughly un-American. Sorry. For some reason, he thought it was inappropriate.
He just continues.
For a doctor to take advantage of his patients, for a wife to emasculate her husband, and so forth.
But this is ridiculous. If he was such a patriotic American, why didn't he just report us to the authorities?
He decided to put his information to good use and make a little money out of it. What could be more American than that?
She's like, yeah.
Your role in all this? I was a victim too. At least my wife was. She had friends who were socialists.
End of the world.
Yeah. They're all over Twitter these days. So it's like whatever. You know.
But Mr. Body threatened to give my wife's name to the House Un-American Activities Committee unless she named them. She refused, and so he blackmailed her. We had no money, and the price of his silence was that we worked for him for nothing. We were slaves. Well, to make a long story short, the suicide of my wife preyed on my mind and created a sense of injustice in me. I resolved to put Mr. Body behind bars. It seemed to me the best way to do it, and to free all of you from the same burden of blackmail, was to get everyone face to face, confront Mr. Body with his crimes, and then turn him over to the police.
So, everything is explained.
Nothing's explained. We still don't know who killed him.
The point is, we've got to find out in the next 39 minutes before the police arrive.
My God, we can't have them come here now. But
How can we possibly find out which of you did it? What do you mean, which of you did it?
Well, I didn't do it. Well, one of us did. We all had the opportunity. We all had a motive.
great Squabbler chair.
Maybe it wasn't one of us.
Well, who else could it have been?
Who else is in the house?
Only the cook.
The cook!
Had to be the cook.
Yeah.
The kitchen.
So Wadsworth isn't in there.
Love the container says flour.
Yeah. I'm gonna just watch that the whole time. Like, who's in the room? Who's not in the room? Like, doesn't really matter, but.
She's not here.
Somebody help me, please.
A lot of help she gave him.
Yeah.
Don't touch it. That's evidence.
Oh, not for us. We have to find out who did this. We can't take fingerprints.
I think you'd better explain yourself, Wadsworth.
Me? Why me?
Who would want to kill the cook?
No, it wasn't that bad.
How can you show me a time like this?
It's my defense mechanism.
Some defense. If I was the killer, I would kill you next.
Oh?
Said if. Hey, come on. There is only one admitted killer here, and it is certainly not me. It is her.
I've admitted nothing.
You had.
Mine or other women?
Yours.
5.
5.
Yes, just the 5. Husband should be like Kleenex. Soft, strong, and disposable.
You lure men to their deaths like a spider with flies.
Flies are where men are most vulnerable.
Right. Well, if it wasn't you, then who was it? Who had the dagger anyway? It was you, Mrs. Peacock, wasn't it?
Yes, but I put it down.
Where?
In the study. I don't know. Before I paid, after I paid, I don't know. But any of you could have...
But yeah, didn't you say she was the one not in the room previously?
Yeah.
And then he died. And then she
Right.
died from a knife wound.
It actually does kind of line up with some of the, like, if you follow the
Scenarios,
endings, yeah, but whatever.
Look, the body's gone.
Who's there?
Nobody.
What do you mean?
Nobody. Nobody. That's what we mean. Mr. Body's body, it's gone.
Maybe he wasn't dead.
He was.
We should have made sure. How much can you tell us? That doesn't fall apart. Where is he?
We better look for it.
Just leave the corpse just sitting there in the
Yeah.
doorway.
like they're looking around. It's like the body would be clearly there if it were there. Like.
What difference does it make now?
Makes quite a difference to him. Maybe there is life after death. Life after death is as improbable as sex after marriage.
Maybe.
So probable, like it's like yeah.
Well, if you'll excuse me, I have to, is there no girls' room? Oui, madame. No, I just want to powder my nose.
Sort of cheap joke.
Yeah.
What's this, Wadsworth?
I'm afraid those are the negatives to which Colonel Mustard earlier referred.
Oh my God.
Were you planning to blackmail him, Wadsworth?
Certainly not. I'd obtained them for the Colonel, and I was going to give them back as soon as Mr. Body was unmasked.
Very pretty. Would you like to see these a bit? They might shock you. No, merci. Amélie. Oh, how do you know what kind of pictures they are? If you're such a lady.
What sort of pictures are they? They are my pictures, and I'd like them back, please.
No, I'm afraid there's something in them that concerns me, too.
Let me see.
Oh, no. Nobody can get into that position.
Sure they can. Let me show you.
Get off me.
Meanwhile. Meanwhile.
Really is pretty breathtaking that his name is literally Body. It's just like, oh, he's not even a real person. He's just a body. Fresh meat.
You've got blood on your hands.
I didn't do it! He's got new injuries. Well, he's certainly dead now. Why would anyone want to kill him twice?
Seems so unnecessary.
That's what we call overkill. What we call psychotic.
Unless he wasn't dead before.
What's the difference?
That's what we're trying to find out. We're trying to find out who killed
The
him.
candlestick up there.
Yep.
What? There's no need to shout. I'm not shouting. All right, I am. I'm shouting. I'm shouting. I'm shouting.
Okay, put the corpses on the sofa.
There's gonna be a mess for the cops to sort out.
Yeah. Well, it'll all be explained. But.
If it would have just kind of ended now, though. So
Yeah.
like, oh, we moved it here, and then so and so was here, and
Careful, don't get flat on the sofa.
How do we use these? The dagger will go further into her back.
Tip her forward over the arm.
The smartest thing he said.
Now, Mr. Body. Now, who had access to the candlestick?
All of us. It was given to you. Yeah, but I dropped it on the table. Anyone could have picked it up. You, him.
Look, we still have all these weapons. The gun, the rope.
I love he already had like a ice pack to put on his head.
Yeah.
Like, he took the time to do that, particularly. Look.
What are you doing with the kitty?
Put it in my pocket.
Why?
Well, he'd safe, obviously.
That means that you can open it whenever you want.
But it also means that you can't.
But what if you're the murderer?
paranoia at its height.
Oh, it's got to be put somewhere. If I put it, I know I'm safe.
We don't know that we
Turning each of these characters into even more deranged versions of themselves.
Sorry. Can you help? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb the whole household, but my car broke down out here, and I was wondering if I could use your phone.
Just a minute.
False alarm. Must be this glare.
Very well, sir. Would you care to come in?
Excuse me.
Where is it? What, the body? The phone.
Yum yum.
There's nobody. There's nobody in the study. No. But I think there's a phone in the lounge. Thank you.
The lounge.
The BK Lounge.
Yeah.
Yeah, harken back to an old Dane Cook bit.
Perhaps you'll be good enough to wait here. Sir? Where's the key? In my pocket. Not that key, the key to the cupboard. With the weapons. You still wish me to throw it away? Yes! Well, what now?
Wadsworth, let me out.
No.
Why not?
We gotta know who did it. We're all in this together now.
If you leave, I'll say that you killed them both. Me too.
Me too.
Oh, Wadsworth, I'll make you sorry you ever started this. One day when we're alone together.
This is right. No man in his right mind will be alone together with you. Well, I could use a drink.
Oh, so could I.
Just checking.
Everything all right?
Yep, 2 corpses, everything's fine. Anybody else want a whiskey?
Yeah.
All right, look. Everybody.
And his is like the biggest, clearly.
Yeah.
Wadsworth, am I right thinking there is nobody else in this house? No. Then there is someone else in this house.
No, sorry. I said no, meaning yes.
No meaning yes. Look, I want a straight answer. Is there someone else or isn't there? Yes. No.
No.
No, there is or no, there isn't.
Yes.
Yeah, really.
Don't you think we should get that man out of the house before he finds out what's been going on here?
On here.
Can we throw him outside in this weather?
Let him stay in the house. He may get suspicious.
If we throw him out, he may get even more suspicious. If I were him, I'd be suspicious already.
Oh, who cares? That guy doesn't matter. Let him stay locked up for another half an hour. And there are 2 dead bodies in the study.
Everybody's shrill levels turned up to 11.
Yeah.
If there's anybody else in this house, I told you there isn't. There isn't any confusion or there isn't anybody else. Either. Or both. Just give me a clear answer. Certainly. What was the question? Is there anybody else in the house? No! That's what he says. Does he know? I suggest we handle this in proper military fashion. We split up and search the house.
Split up.
Yes. We have very little time left, so we'll split up into pairs. Pairs? Yes.
Wait a minute. Suppose that one of us is the murderer. If we split up into pairs, whichever one of us is left with a killer might get killed.
Then we would have discovered who the murderer is.
But the
Yeah.
other half of the pair would be dead.
This is war, Peacock.
Not exactly.
Stop breaking eggs. Every cook will tell you that.
But look what happened to the cook.
Colonel, are you willing to take that chance?
What choice have we?
None.
Yeah, supposedly Lynn had gotten them to all watch His Girl Friday
Yeah.
before this, which makes sense as far as the way they're all talking really fast. No, thank you.
I suggest
That's
Oh,
what-
because he's the homosexual.
obviously that movie's considered the apex of
Yeah.
screwball comedy.
But you know, it's like, oh, he's a homosexual. He don't want to be around the hot woman. Like, okay.
Ready? The 2 shortest together. The next 2 shortest together. Agreed? And I suggest the 2 shortest search the cellar and so on up.
You know something that's never explained about this?
What?
Whose house is this?
Yeah.
Because if it's not Body, and it's not really Wadsworth's, whose is it? Like,
Yeah.
I don't think that's ever explained, but
Yeah.
at least I don't think so. They might have at some point, but I don't remember.
Sure, me, honey bunch.
Oh, God. Oh, my God.
It's murder to have to be with him.
Yeah. Like, I'm gonna throw up my...
Are we we know what's in the study. Just come from the library and the stranger's wife up in the lounge.
Getting all scary. This is kind of a stupid, useless idea. Let's split up and see if somebody else is in the house. So, like, what would it matter? You're one of them, you know?
Yeah.
It's just like, I mean, I know that's part of the theory, but...
Yeah.
And a lot of people, you know, complained about this section of the movie, which I don't really have a problem with exactly, but it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, what's the point of doing all that? Like, that weird cat head there.
Yeah.
I think about a random amount.
At the top of the stairs yet? No.
They could have been up there
Yeah.
already. Look. The thing is, it cuts back to that same shot later where they're still
Yeah.
standing there. Oh.
Ladies first.
No, you can go first.
No, I insist.
No, I insist.
Well, what are you afraid of? A fate worse than death?
No, just death.
Are you getting in there?
Yes, are you?
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Josh.
I don't see any light switches in there.
Oh, neither do I, but there must be a switch or something.
Shall I come in with you?
No. I mean, no.
A real Marx Brothers gag.
Yeah.
Ladies first.
Like, well,
The billiard room, by the way. I forgot to name drop that.
yeah.
Go on. I'll be right back.
There's a ballroom too, but I don't remember if that's in this or not.
What would you guess of?
Their conservatory's never mentioned by name,
Yeah.
but I guess it was in that moment
Greenhouse looking
of,
place, yeah.
Don't you find a certain thrill in like creeping around
Yeah.
and then like, oh, is there somebody there? Like, it's kind of like hide and seek. Like,
Yeah.
What room's this?
That's the thing people misunderstand about Michael Myers. He was just trying to play some hide and seek.
Yeah.
People, oh, he takes it too far. It's like, listen, he's just innovating. People who always innovate in life are always the ones who are, defamed and brought down by society. So
defamed.
I guess this would have as we
Oh,
said,
this is the ballroom here. So
this isn't quite a horror movie, but obviously the 80s was so known as the era of the slasher in terms of like horror movies,
By the way, one genre that is certainly on Shudder, the slasher movie.
I would imagine.
So, yeah.
Well, I know that, every decade of horror has its own hallmarks and things critics are especially incensed by. Obviously, slasher movies were a huge target for critics in the
especially
80s.
very famously, Siskel and Ebert really loathed Friday the 13th for good reason.
Mm-hmm.
And talked about that a lot, and that's a kind of infamous review or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, they were right, so whatever. The movie's not good, so.
Famously, Ebert also went out of his way to criticize Isabel Rossellini's use in Blue Velvet when that came out in '86. And
wait, who is it?
Who could it be? Who could this be?
Was that the ending? The original ending? Yeah. Oh, there's another key? Who can this be? That's that musician guy we were talking about.
I'm a little nervous.
I'll be too.
Meanwhile...
Surprise.
Surprise. It's one of the great moments
in
from
the Invisible Man.
Yeah, modern movie history. I think he was like Mustard's driver or something. As it'll turn out. I don't want to give it all away. Like, I could care less. Did they ever get all the way up the steps?
One thing I know is somebody's a killer here.
Is it Jerry Lee Lewis, the killer? You know. Oh, this. There's no alternative rock. There really is kind of no alternative rock, though. It's like, what does that even mean? You know? It will fall in one of the endings.
Yeah.
That was just barely not in his head.
Yeah.
Or, oh, it's another one that falls later. Yeah, by the way.
Yeah. Despite all those shenanigans, someone else is dead.
Oh, they did name it. Oh my God! Like, Lizzie's story, her story.
I'm going to open it. Why? I have nothing to hide. I didn't do it. The key.
Did the driver come in here for any help by any chance?
No. Well, actually, yes.
No. There seemed to be some kind of disagreement.
He's thinking, this is what happens when white people are left to their own devices.
Yeah.
Of course you may, sir. You may use the one in the, no. You could use the one in the, no. Oh, would you be kind enough to wait in the, library?
Sure.
Okay. Whatever.
Don't I know you from someplace? You all seem to be very anxious about something.
I guess the chandelier fell down, almost killed us. Would you like to come this way, please, sir? Practically drafty, these old houses.
Okay.
Please have yourself a drink, if you'd like. Not the cognac, just in case.
Just in case of what?
We should have told her.
Okay, well, you say that now.
I said it then.
Let's bring this up.
Why would you be that worried about the chandelier right now?
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
There's other things
Okay,
going on, as it turns out.
Hello? Maybe the cop answered it.
And who shall I say is calling? Would you hold on, please? Let me out of here! Let me out of here! You have no right to shut me in! I'll book you for false arrest and wrongful imprisonment and obstructing an officer in the course of his duty and murder!
What do you mean? Murder.
I just said it so you would open the door. What's going on around here? And why would you lock me in? And why are you receiving phone calls from J. Edgar Hoover? J. Edgar Hoover? That's right. The head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
by the way, why would
Why is J. Edgar Hoover on your phone? I didn't know. He's on everybody else's. Why shouldn't he be on mine?
why would he be calling? By the way, and it is that there are characters here that are FBI agents, but why would he specifically be calling?
Yeah,
It's not.
right.
Why would it not be somebody else?
Mhm.
You know, whatever.
Mind if I look around?
Sure. You can show him around, Mr. Green.
Me?
Yes, you can show him the dining room, the kitchen, the ballroom.
Fine.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm a normal, acceptable human being.
I'll show you the dining room, or the kitchen, or the ballroom.
In that order.
Make it look convincing.
Oh, this whole little game.
This is the dining room.
No kidding.
Come on.
What's going on in those two rooms?
Which two rooms?
Those two rooms.
Oh, those two rooms.
Yes.
Officer, I don't think you should go in there.
Why not?
Because it's all too shocking.
Rock and roll music. That doo-wop.
Clearly got blood on his head, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Wow, sick.
Clearly, like opening her eyes on purpose.
It's not all that shocking. These folks are just having a good time. Excuse me.
The look on his face.
This man's drunk. Dead drunk.
Well, dead, yeah.
You're not gonna drive home, are you?
He won't be driving sir, I promise you that.
Yeah.
Somebody will give him a lift, huh?
Oh, we'll get him a car.
A long black car.
A limousine. Oh.
I am a fiend.
Too late, I've seen it all. You have? I can explain everything.
You don't have to.
I don't?
Don't worry, there's nothing illegal about any of this.
Are you sure?
Of course, this is America.
I see.
It's a free country. Did you know that?
I didn't know it was that free. May I use your phone now?
Certainly.
Why did you lock him in again?
You haven't finished searching the house yet.
I'm running out of time. Only 15 minutes before the police come. The police already came.
Let's get on with it.
Monsieur?
All-time moment here. Oh, I better check in there. Who's gonna be in there? Don't you love getting hit in the head and you're like, oh.
I wonder where this one goes.
Don't you love getting hit in the head? Like, no.
I love brain cells.
Yeah.
Some do not, but you know.
William McKinley.
Yeah, looks like it.
I mean, dead man.
Mm-hmm.
Well-known dead man.
Yeah. Our third assassinated president.
You know how there's that movie, The Assassination of Richard Nixon, that has like Sean Penn in it? I've always seen that. I'm like, what is that?
I have no clue what that's about, really.
It's probably about an attempted assassin or something, but... Who would want to kill Nixon? He never did anything wrong at all. I always thought that was such a weird image.
Yeah. It's you. But who is the you?
I love how the voice was like very specifically like gender neutral almost.
Yeah.
Like,
No, I'm not on duty. But I have a feeling that I'm in danger. You know that big, ugly house on top? Hello? Hello? Are you there?
Got his bell rung.
the moment of all time. It's like, nope, done with that.
We need to bring that back, though. Singing telegram.
Yeah.
What's this? Another door?
How's that song still playing?
Yeah. Well, what a night we've had, you know?
Yeah.
Time flies when you're a paranoid psychopath, you know? Like, all these people
Yeah.
are by this point. Even the innocent ones. But are we all really, quote, innocent?
Well, one of them definitively is all the way.
Or more,
like, yeah. It's like, oh, but he's gay. It's like, yeah, innocent. I said that word. I think it still applies, but whatever, it's like, okay, but this time, oh my god, even now, a lot of people, but
Two murders. Neither of them shot. That's what I heard it done.
I thought it out. Thought I heard the front door slam.
Oh, God. Murder must have run out.
Three murders.
The singing telegram went down. Like,
This is getting serious.
this is getting serious.
yeah. Only now getting serious though. Wasn't serious till like the third or fourth body, like
BODDY.
an accusation was made, in the game.
Yeah.
In order to help you understand what happened,
If you don't get it right, you die.
step by step. At the start of the evening, Yvette was here by herself, waiting to offer you all a glass of champagne. I was in the hall. I know because I was there. Then I and the cook was in here alive, sharpening knives, preparing for dinner. And then
Joseph McCarthy was on TV.
Yeah.
He's the killer.
Yeah. He only died like 3 years later after this, basically due to alcoholism. He drank himself to death.
Okay. Pale and tragic.
And I introduced Mrs. White to Colonel Mustard. Hello, hello. And I noticed that Mrs. White and Yvette flinched. Then there was a rumble of thunder and a crash of lightning. And to make a long story short, one by one you all arrived. And then the door was shut by the cook. And we went into the dining room. And Mrs. Peacock sat here. And Professor Plum sat here. And Mrs. White sat here. And Mr. Green, Miss Scarlet, Colonel Mustard. This chair was vacant. Anyway, we all revealed we'd all received a letter. You'd had a letter, you'd had a letter, and you'd had a letter. The point is, blackmail.
All this came out after dinner in the study.
You're right.
Love now they're leading him
Yeah.
right before he's even get there.
And Mr. Peacock here, and Miss Scarlet here, I'm here, and Colonel Mustard, and Mrs. White. I'm getting there, I'm getting there. And Mr. Body went to get his surprise packages from the hall. And you all opened your presents. Mr. Body switched off the lights. Mr. Body lay on the floor, apparently dead. He was dead, I examined him. Then why was he bashed on the head a few minutes later with a candlestick if he was dead already? All right, I made a mistake. Right. But if so, why was Mr. Body pretending to be dead? It could only be because he realized that his scheme had misfired, and the gunshot was intended to kill him, not me. Look, the bullet grazed his ear. Clearly his best hope of escaping death was to pretend to be dead already. So whoever grabbed the gun from me in the dark was trying to kill him. But remember what happened next. Mrs. Peacock took a drink. You said, maybe it's poisoned. She screamed. Mr. Green. I had to stop her screaming. More screaming. Yvette, the billiard room. We all rushed up. But one of us wasn't here.
This is Miss Peacock, by the way. I said it already.
One of us was murdering the cook. Who wasn't here with us? Do you know? I do. While we stood here, trying to stop Yvette from panicking, one of us could have stayed in the study.
This shot.
and stabbed the cook.
Oh, how could he risk it? We might have seen him running back.
Not if they used this secret passage. And the murderer ran back down the secret passage to the study.
Is that where it goes out?
Yeah, look!
McKinley did it.
Yeah.
How did you know? This house belongs
He was sick of getting killed, so he's like, I gotta come back
But
and kill
this house belongs to a friend of mine.
Yeah.
If I was the murderer, why would I reveal to you how I did it?
Well, who else knew about the secret passage?
found it. You could have known about it all the time.
But I didn't. So why should we believe you?
Because she was with us all in the billiard room doorway while Yvette was screaming. Don't you remember?
What I don't understand is why was the cook murdered? She had nothing to do with Mr. Body.
Of course she did. I've got it here, because you were all implicated in Mr. Body's dastardly blackmail. Did none of you deduce that the others were involved too?
What?
The cook and Yvette?
No.
That's how he got all his information. Before he could blackmail anyone, Mr. Body had to discover their guilty secret. The cook and Yvette were his accomplices. See? So, whoever knew that the cook was involved killed her? Yes. I know, because I was Mr. Body's butler.
I know.
The cook had worked for one of you. Who? You recognized Yvette, didn't you? Don't deny it.
What do you mean, don't deny it? I'm not denying anything.
Another denial.
Oh, right, it's true. I knew that. My husband had an affair with her. I didn't care. I wasn't jealous.
You knew Yvette too, didn't you?
Yes, she worked for me.
And you also knew her, sir. We've already established that you were one of Miss Scarlett's clients. That's why you were so desperate to get your hands on those negatives. Photographs of you and Yvette in flagrante delicto, remember?
Delecto. Delectos.
Your old mother just would have killed her.
Oh, that would have been quite an achievement since you told us that she's dead already. So he had the motive.
You all had a motive. But where and when was Mr. Body killed? Don't you see? Look, we came back from the study with Yvette. Mr. Body was on the floor, pretending to be dead. But one of us knows he's alive. I explained that I was Mr. Body's butler and I'd invited you here. And we realized there was only one other person in the house.
Reprise moment. This is all big reprisal.
Mm-hmm.
By now she was dead. We laid her down with our backs into the freezer. One of us slipped through the same secret passage.
Again?
Of course, back to the study. The murderer was in the secret passage. Meanwhile, Mr. Body been on the floor. He jumped up. The murderer came out of the secret panel, picked up the candlestick.
I know the point of this is to be overwhelming, but it is getting a little tedious.
Yeah.
Not a little.
They need to fill the feature length. Because the funny thing is that this movie is an hour and 36 minutes with credits and with all of the endings. So
really, it's like 80-some minutes.
Yeah.
If you take just one ending.
I didn't throw the key away. I put it in my pocket. And someone was taking it out of my pocket and substituted another. We were all in a huddle. Any one of us could have done that. Precisely. Wait a minute.
Colonel Mustard has a top-secret Pentagon job. Mrs. White's husband was a nuclear physicist, and Yvette is a link between them.
What is your top secret job, Colonel? I can tell you. He's working on the secret of the next fusion bomb.
Oh my God.
Can you give the secret? Yes, they deny it.
Is the plot between them Wadsworth, or did Colonel Mustard do it alone?
We shall see. Let's look at the other murders. Yes. Bad luck that that motorist arrived at that moment. It wasn't luck. I invited him.
You did?
Of course, it's obvious. Everyone here tonight was either Mr. Body's victim or accomplice. Everyone who has died gave him vital information about one of you. I got them here so they give evidence against him and force him to confess.
Yeah? What about that motorist? What kind of information did he have?
He was my driver during the war. And what was he holding over you? He knew that I was a war profiteer. I stole essential Air Force radio parts. I sold them. Black market. That is how I made all my money. That does not make me a murderer.
But a lot of our airmen died because their radios didn't work. Was the policeman working for Mr. Body too?
Moralizing.
Yeah.
He was on my payroll. I bribed him once a week so I could carry on with business. Mr. Body found out somehow.
Oh my God.
Oh, please.
And the singing telegram girl?
I mean, she was your singing telegram.
I just love the inexplicableness of just throwing her in this, by the way. Just singing telegram.
That's how I lost my license. Mr. Body found that out too.
Oh, by the way, I had an affair with her.
Yeah.
body. But I didn't know anything about any of you until this evening. First, the murderer needed to get the weapons. He's taken them from my pocket. And then we all followed Colonel Mustard's suggestion that we split up and search the house.
That's right. It was Colonel Mustard's suggestion.
And one of us got away from his or her partner and hurried to the study. On the desk was the envelope from Mr. Body. It contained photographs and letters. The evidence of Mr. Body's network of informants.
Where's the envelope now?
Gone. Destroyed. Perhaps in the fire. The only possible place.
Yeah, I mean, it's all literally laying there.
Yeah.
Like.
Then, having found out the whole story, the murderer went to the cupboard, unlocked it with the key, took out the wrench.
Then we found the secret passage from the conservatory to the lounge, where we found the motorist dead.
That's right. And we couldn't get in. So we went back to the open cupboard, got the gun, and shot the door open. Bang! And then the doorbell rang.
Oh, whoever it is, they gotta go away or they'll be killed. Oh.
Good evening. Have you ever given any thought to the kingdom of heaven?
What?
And the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
You ain't just whistling Dixie.
Armageddon is almost upon us.
I got news for you. It's already here.
Go away.
But your souls are in danger.
Our lives are in danger, you beatnik.
Beatnik.
It's funny a religious person's accused of being a beatnik. It's
Yeah.
usually not how it worked, but.
And the murderer switched off the electricity. Oh my God.
So this is where all the different endings start.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, didn't mean to frighten you. You're a bit late for that. Hate when you just. Then there were 3 more.
What? Why did she scream?
Oh, who did? The one person who wasn't with us. Did that? She was in the billiard room listening to our conversation. She heard the gunshot. She thought he was dead. And while we all examined the bullet hole, she crept into the study, picked up the dagger, ran to the kitchen, and stabbed the cook. We didn't hear the cook scream, because Mrs. Peacock was screaming about the poisoned brandy. Then Yvette returned to the billiard room. She screamed, and we all ran to her. Well, when did she kill Mr. Body? When I said. We all ran to the kitchen to see the cook. Yvette hid in the study to check that Mr. Body was dead. He got up and followed them down the hall.
Okay.
So she hit him on the head with a candlestick and dragged him to the toilet.
Why?
To create confusion.
It worked.
Why did she do it? Was it because she was acting under orders from the person who later killed her? Who?
Who?
Was it one of her clients? Or was it a jealous wife? Or an adulterous doctor? No.
No.
It was her employer, Miss Garrett.
That's a lie.
Is it? You used her the way you always used her. You killed the motorist when we split up to search the house.
How could I have known about the secret passage?
Easy. Yvette told you. So when we split up again, you switched off the electricity. It was easy for you.
The black gloves.
Yeah.
Like, where'd they get the gloves from?
Yeah.
Got the lead pipe and the rope, strangled Yvette, ran to the library, killed the cop, picked up the gun where Yvette dropped it, opened the front door, recognized the singing telegram from her photograph, and shot her.
Imagine her point of view,
Yeah.
seeing that, and she's like, and then like, well, I'm dead.
Turn out your pockets. Ladies, empty your purses. Whoever has the gun is the murderer.
Brilliantly worked out, Wadsworth. I congratulate you.
Me too.
Shut up.
Now, there's one thing I don't understand.
One thing?
Why did you do it? Half of Washington knows what kind of business you run. You were in no real danger. The whole town would be implicated if you were exposed.
I don't think they know my real business.
Oh, there's more.
My business is secrets. Yvette found them out for me. The secrets of Senator Peacock's defense committee, of Colonel Mustard's fusion
So
bomb,
she was the real body,
that supplies you
in a
with
way, like not literally, but
and the work of your husband, nuclear physicist.
So, it is political. You're a communist.
No, Mr. Green. Communism is just a red herring. Like all members of the oldest profession, I'm a capitalist, and I'm going to sell my secrets, your secrets, to the highest bidder.
What if we don't cooperate?
You will. I'll expose you.
We could expose you. 6 murders?
I hardly think it will enhance your reputation at the UN, Professor Plum, if it's revealed that you have been implicated not only in adultery with one of your patients, but in her death. and the deaths of 5 other people?
You don't know what kind of people they have at the UN. I might go up with their estimation. It's no good.
Keep going, oh, the UN sucks. It's like, okay, like...
I know, Security 5, but you've been paying me in government information. All of you. Except you, Wadsworth. You, as a mere butler, have no access to government secrets. So, I'm afraid your moment has come.
Not so fast, Miss Scarlet. I do have a secret or two.
Oh, yeah, such as...
The game's up, Scarlet. There are no more bullets left in that gun.
Come on, you don't come to fall for that old trick.
It's not a trick. There was 1 shot at Mr. Body in the study, 2 for the chandelier, 2 at the lounge door, and 1 for the singing telegram.
That's on 6.
1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1.
There was only 1 shot that got the chandelier. That's 1 plus 2 plus 1 plus 1.
Even if you were right, that would be 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 1, not 1 plus 2 plus 1 plus 1.
Okay, fine. 1 plus 2 plus 1. Shut up! Point is, there's 1 bullet left in this gun, and guess who's gonna get it?
The big moment. We're gonna see 2 more times. The beatnik.
I did warn you, my dear. Mr. Hoover is an expert on Armageddon.
Don't he try to shoot you?
Frankly, Scarlet, I don't give a damn. As I was trying to
Yeah.
what is left in this gun, you see? 1 plus 2 plus 1 plus 2 plus 1 is...
So that would be the final moment of somebody's viewing, you know? So what do you think of that one? How about this?
It makes some sense that Scarlet would be at the center of all these in terms of her her business that she does, but obviously it seems illogical that she'd be doing all the running around that she's doing too. But the whole story's engineered in such a way it can be, oh well, whatever happened, you know, like.
See, I noticed that.
Your cook. Don't you remember your fatal mistake?
Oh, yeah.
You told us at dinner that we were eating one of your favorite recipes. And monkey's brains, though popular in Cantonese cuisine, are not often to be found in Washington, D.C.
Is that what we ate?
Why would I have murdered all the others?
Obviously, in case Mr. Body had told them about you.
So it was all nothing to do.
I didn't say earlier, but it looked like what they were eating was biscuits and gravy.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Communism is a red herring. We're gonna hear it one more time, so.
The gun is missing. Gentlemen, turn out your pockets. Ladies, empty your purses. Whoever has the gun is the murderer.
Very well. What are you supposed to do about it?
Nothing. Nothing at all. I don't approve of murder, but it seems to me you've done the world a public service by ridding it of an appalling blackmailer and his disgusting informers.
But the police will be here any minute. What happens then?
Why should the police come? Nobody's called them.
You mean?
That's right. Now, I suggest that we stack the box in the cellar, lock it, leave quietly one at a time, and pretend that none of this has ever happened.
Great idea. I'll leave first. If you don't mind.
Be my guest. In fact, I think we all owe you a vote of thanks. For she's a jolly good fellow, for she's a jolly good fellow.
What a random decision.
Which nobody can deny, which nobody can deny, which nobody can deny. For she's a jolly good fellow, for she's a jolly good fellow, for she's a jolly...
I told you I didn't do it.
Well, won't the authorities find out what happened? The FBI will take care of that. You mean my phone call from Mr. Hoover? I work for him, of course. How else could I have known everything about you? There's still one thing I don't understand.
One.
Who was Mrs. Peacock taking bribes from? A foreign power. Her husband, the senator, has influence over defense contracts. Is there going to be a cover-up? Not in the public interest. What could be gained by exposure?
Well, is the FBI in the habit of cleaning up after multiple murder?
Yes. Why do you think it's run by a man called Hoover?
Okay.
Vacuum Man.
I mean,
Home Alone 2.
Yeah, he's in it. So
How did you know my name?
The kingdom of heaven is at hand.
why did they have all those lights set up? By the way,
This is the Hollywood studio.
yeah.
You see, like the Mantis, we always get our man.
Mrs. Peacock was a man?
Would anyone care for the usual dessert?
I think I like that one a little more than the other one, but here's what really happened. So is this saying this is the canonical ending?
Yeah.
You're a bit late for that. Then there were 3 more murders. Let's consider each murder one by one. Professor Plum, you knew that Mr. Body was still alive. Even psychiatrists can tell the difference between patients who are alive or dead. You fired the gun in the dark and missed, so you pretended he was dead. That's how you were able to kill him later unobserved.
That's right. He was the missing person in the kitchen after we found the cook dead.
But he was with us in the billiard room when we found Yvette screaming. If that's when the cook was killed, how did he do it?
I didn't.
You don't expect us to believe that, do you?
I expect you to believe it. You killed the cook. She used to be your cook, and she informed on you to Mr. Body. You made one
Yeah. That fatal mistake.
sitting here at dinner. Mrs. Peacock told us that she was eating one of her favorite
Biscuits and gravy.
and monkey's brains, though popular in Cantonese cuisine, are not often to be found in Washington, D.C. Colonel Mustard, when we saw the murderers at the front door, you took the key to the weapons cupboard out of my
This look on his face.
You separated from Miss Scarlet, crossed the hall.
Open the cupboard. Random line reading.
Message killed the murderess with a blow on the head. Like that!
This is incredible.
Not so incredible as what happened next. After we were split up again, I went
Okay.
upstairs with you. Yes, you, Mrs. White.
That Roosevelt there.
While I was in the master
Theodore.
bedroom, you hurried downstairs and turned off the electricity. Got the rope from the open cupboard and throttled.
Throttled.
You were jealous that your husband was stooping Yvette. That's why you
Stoop.
killed him, too.
Yes.
Her all-time moment.
Yes, I did it. I killed Yvette. I hated her so much. It flames.
Somebody on Twitter has this as their
Yeah.
profile pic.
Yeah.
I see a lot.
But while we were in the billiard room,
All right, moving on.
and at the cover of darkness, got to the library, where she hit the cop whom she'd been bribing on the head with a lead pipe. True or false?
True. Who are you? Harry Mason.
So it must have been Mr. Green who shot the singing telegram. I didn't do it. Well, there's nobody else left.
But I didn't do it. The gun is missing. Whoever's got the gun shot the girl.
I shot her.
You? So it was you. I was going to expose you.
I know. So I choose to expose myself. Please, there are ladies present.
Not that we've met until tonight.
PG, remember?
Yeah.
You're Mr. Pye.
Wait a minute. So who did I kill?
My butler.
Oh, shucks. He was expendable.
Who did I kill?
Yeah.
Disposing of my
So everybody killed somebody. I want to kill somebody.
saved me a lot of trouble. Now there's no evidence against me.
This all has nothing to do with my disappearing nuclear physicist husband or Colonel Mustard's work with the new top-secret fusion bomb.
No. Communism is just a red herring.
Did you know that?
Yeah, I heard about it.
The police will be here any minute. You'll never get away with this, any of you.
Why should the police come? Nobody's called.
You mean? Oh my God! Of course.
So why shouldn't we get away with it? We'll stack the bodies in the cellar, lock it, leave quietly one at a time, and forget that any of this ever happened.
And you'll just go on blackmailing us all.
Of course. Why not?
Well, I'll tell you why not.
Good shot.
Good shot, Green.
Green got game.
No, I'm a plant.
Somebody told Tom Green, who directed Freddy Got Fingered, like when he shot some shots, good shot, Green. Like, but I don't think so because that movie is assuredly not good. So, yes, he's the FBI guy.
Mm-hmm. We're all complicit.
I did. In the hall. With the revolver. Okay, Chief, take him away. I'm gonna go home and sleep with my wife.
So he did still kill somebody,
yeah.
but it was for love, you know? Yeah.
It was a clever closing credits sequence.
Yeah. But yeah, so obviously a big gimmick. It would have just been interesting to have just been like, they all did it.
Yeah.
And just do that one, you know, but... As I said, the other ones make enough sense, but... It's kind of just like, okay, whatever. Yeah. But, you know... Yeah, why didn't they get the cards, you know?
Cop 1, Cop 2, Cop 3.
Why do we gotta screw them over, you know? Like...
Of course, ended on a huge 50s song here. Shake, Rattle, and Roll.
Clue and Cluedo. So what did you think of watching it again?
About the same. I still like it.
Yet that, like, last kind of penultimate, like, 10 or 15 minutes is just a little bit repetitive.
That, and even the middle feels like it's spinning its wheels for some time, you know. It goes back to the whole story, hearing Lynn talk about how Landis pitched this. The whole thing sounds like a really great pitch.
Yeah.
And I don't quite think that the movie in any of these forms quite achieves that satisfaction, but that's fine. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to, but still fine, good little movie, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't think it quite sticks the landing of its potential, but
it doesn't stick the Landis.
But most movies don't, so that's fine.
Well, we know that Landis has a habit of not sticking the landing with things. Hate to joke about that, but you know.
Yeah.
But, oh well.
So we can go ahead and pause on this and break the sync. So it's interesting that this was Lynn's first film he directed. Because I'd say fairly well directed. I mean, you know, it.
Yeah, because randomly some people are like, "Oh, it's not well directed. It looks like trash." It's just like, no, I mean, it looks fine. Yeah. But whatever.
Again, really, and the performances, I would say on the whole are quite good and fit what the archetypes are. It's just there's a little. It really comes down to the writing. I think I don't know. I guess Robert Towne was on vacation. You know,
I guess
him on the phone. You know.
Oh, well.
One of Paramount's trusted scribes, but anyways, anything else to say?
Not really.
Clue?
Yeah, it is what
Still
it is.
a solid movie. I would say good, but not as good as the board game in its own way.
No,
because the board game's pretty fun. So
yeah, I was actually been thinking about this movie a lot recently because we were going to do it, and because I had some time when I was at school. We had some time left over at the end of the year. You know how that goes, and I was playing some of it with. Some of my students, and they really enjoyed it, and that was fun to do. Some of them had never played it before.
Well, that's good. You introducing that to them, if nothing else.
And I kind of talked about the movie a little bit. I says, I'm a pretty big. I was saying, I'm a pretty big fan of it, but anyway. So
I'll tell you a movie I know we're both a big fan.
Oh yeah,
of. The Mummy. Now, not
which one?
Not Let's count. The Universal Mummy is good.
Not the blood from Mummy's tomb,
but. If you're a child of the 90s or the early 2000s like we are, we're talking The Mummy, 1999 edition, which, one of our least listened to episodes, I should say, is the Invisible Man podcast. Yeah. Go give that a listen because I think we did a good job talking about it.
Yeah. Particularly me. But
of course, of the Universal Monster canon.
Yeah. So we'll,
now,
I guess,
Mummy,
briefly reopen that can of worms next week.
Yeah, The Mummy is like an attempt to, I guess, do a new version of that, like action-oriented remake, and we can talk about the pitfalls, but also the pleasures of combining horror and action, which are two things that typically are not combined. Again, this is a movie we both grew up watching in ad nauseum on VHS and still love to watch. What stands out for you about The Mummy, the 1999 version?
Well, that was a particular era when there were being a lot of... first of all, there's specifically being a lot of TV adaptations like Mission Impossible or... what was another thing?
Wild Wild West.
Wild West, and then Untouchables had happened in the 80s, but it was kind of the late 80s. And then...
Maverick, another Western TV show.
And you also had... movies that were based on comic books like The Phantom and The Rocketeer and this isn't a comic book thing, but Mask of Zorro. It was kind of a really great era for a lot of action adventure. The Shadow, a lot of Dick Tracy.
Yeah,
of course, a lot of and that's not that The Mummy applies to neither of those. It's not based on a comic book or a TV show. But it was a particular era when there were a lot of things being remade into movies, kind of big budget.
In particular,
movies.
a lot of them big budget movies of that time period were like action adventure period pieces.
Right.
So, like a lot of them weren't necessarily even now there are of course tons of contemporary action movies being made, but and I wonder if in some ways that is still a remnant of the Indiana Jones movies that kind of got kicked off in the 80s, and that's still part of that line of movies.
Even that's kind of part of Star Wars.
Yeah.
So, that's probably the case. But what I think's interesting, though, about that is that it decided to take The Mummy, the original 1932 film directed by Karl Freund, which I used to be a really big fan of. I've talked about it back on the Invisible Man podcast. Go and listen to that, like I said, but because I talked a lot. I'm not going to go over all the Universal Monster stuff again, so if you want to know my very detailed opinions on that, I guess go over there, but and go anyway if you don't care, because you need to listen to it. But anyway, it's just interesting that it took... That's a movie I still quite like, but I used to be really a big fan of. But it's you can attest to this, a very musty and kind of slow, dreamlike film. It's very,
unlike we watch. Let's just say full disclosure, we watch tons of black and white movies. Love classic Hollywood. So just because it's in black and white in the 30s, that means nothing to us. No. We can, that's. But even at that time, it's just slow plotting, kind of in a way that some of the other most of the other Universal movies.
Because even Dracula and Frankenstein have senses of action about themselves, sort of, or they're more inherently creepier or have things about them.
Imagery really just sticks
The
with
Mummy, and The Mummy has a lot of great imagery, but it's just a lot slower. I feel like it is still operating on a very silent era impulses, especially the sequence, and it actually was the first of these to really have a sustained score throughout. As well, so that's a little bit weird, but that it had that one sequence where it's the flashback of him explaining his own death and all that stuff, and that's very silent era. Like, it's him narrating it, and there's music, but it's all silent, and and there's big portions of that movie that are very quiet, and it's just a lot slower, and I like that about it actually, because it's more interesting, I think, and it's very dreamlike quality about itself. It kind of feels like you're in a trance in a way. But so The Mummy 1999 is nothing like that at all. It's very loud. It's very robust. It's very action-y.
It was criticized at the time for saying, why are you taking this kind of classic Universal movie and actionifying it, blockbuster-ifying it? I think it had criticism.
And maybe that, and I think it's funny that we chose all these movies in the order we did, is that's another thing of why are you trying to commercialize and commoditize this thing too, and that it in itself became a theme park ride at Universal,
which is very good.
I still haven't actually wrote it.
I don't know if they're. I feel like I might have heard they're getting rid of that. I can't remember.
Oh man,
it's a really good ride though.
But and it's just and like I think along with Mask of Zorro, which I think is an even better movie and one of the best movies of that era as far as that type of thing. Just a really great action movie. Stephen Sommers, I believe, directed The Mummy, correct? Mm-hmm. So, who
later
did
Van Helsing,
right?
which itself is part of that same impulse of maybe we can make an action franchise.
And they've tried to do this multiple times. We talked about it back on the Universal or the Invisible Man podcast about Universal monsters, but that they've tried to reboot these a million times, and it's like they get started, but then it's like they don't ever do it.
Like the newest Tom Cruise Mummy movie.
Right, and they tried to do action with that too. They tried to do the Wolfman with Benicio del Toro back some years ago. They've tried to do Frankenstein multiple times. They've done all these things that they're trying to really do it, and they never follow through with it. So anyway, what I think about this one is it has a great cast. It is an action movie and kind of a horror movie, but it also is very funny. And I wouldn't even go necessarily as far to call that a cult film, but it is a very beloved movie.
And I want to talk about that a little bit more next week. But there's a page you can find on Facebook called like Memotep, which is one of my favorite things on the internet in recent note. It's just it takes all these random moments from the Mummy and finds ways to like memify them and make random jokes you wouldn't have thought. And again, I think it's got like a really great cast. I want to have a conversation too about Brendan Fraser as well, because he's become himself kind of a cult item in recent years. Of a guy who seemed to be really poised to be this huge, big action star for a great many years, and he kind of fell off.
And then he was Encino Man.
Some reasons maybe behind that, and how he himself also
before that, I guess,
was an object of something that typically happens to a lot of women in Hollywood, actually, about they're just seen as purely physical bodies and beings, and that actually weirdly happened to him as a man, which something we don't often talk about enough. That can happen as well. But again, it just has immediately kind of recognizable, fun characters. We quote from it very often and liberally, which I'm sure we're going to be doing next week. And again, for our generation, it's just a big movie. I know a lot of people love it and a lot of people like it. And it's weird. It's already been 20 years now since 22 years now since that movie came out, which is very strange.
And like you've said, there's a lot of reasons of why we're doing it, but I think that we're such students of that film in its own way. I mean, like you said, we've watched it so many times, and there's those movies you watch a million times as a kid, and that was one of those for me. And of course, the VHS intro, we're probably going to do a commentary of that,
very
like we did for the Country Bears. There's so much stuff in there that is going to be a lot to talk about as far as things that we would later discover and be like, oh, that was in that, or in that. So
I think I'll probably tell this again next week. I think the first time I ever saw The Mummy was, I think I asked for it for my birthday in 1999. I would have been turning 7 years old. And I remember seeing a poster of it and seeing trailers. And as a 7-year-old, I was intrigued, but I was like, oh, that might be kind of too scary. And so I watched it for the first time on VHS. And that was probably one of the, quote, scarier movies I ever saw, which itself, of course, isn't all that scary. But as a kid, it's, again, another gateway.
But, I
mean,
to Prince Imhotep doesn't like to be touched. That's an Eastern superstition, I'm afraid. I mean, so... No, but I get that. No, it scared me when I was younger.
But as you said, the VHS intro alone, which we're going to talk about next week, introduced me and you both to a great many things. Probably the biggest of which ended up being Alfred Hitchcock, of all things, too.
That and the Universal monsters, of course, as well, and other random things in that we'll go over. But, so I think
we've been looking forward to this one for a long time. I know this was one of the first movies we identified when we were coming up with this podcast. Well, movies we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, we know it incredibly well, so hopefully we'll have a lot of good things to say about it. No, I'm sure we will have a lot of good things to say about it. So, but like I said, it's interesting. These last three movies that we picked all have some sort of thing about them that are that way, which we did that randomly as far as questions of, is this too commercial, or is this, or I feel like obviously this next one is the one that's the least amount of that, because it's like, well, it's just a remake, and we can kind of talk about the nature of remakes in a way.
We're going, spoiler alert, we're going to be doing that even more than next week in a bonus episode. We're going to be talking about remakes, and then all I'll say about that, after that, we're going to be doing a pretty big, long film series. It's going to be going 9 movies, I think, long. So just
do all your counting and calculating to see if you can figure out what that is.
So prepare for that. That'll be a extendedly long discussion on let's just say a series of movies. But that'll be the end of this episode. This is Kyle.
This is Levi.
Take care. God bless.
Thank you very much. So nice. Goodbye.